Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. My wife Emily and I were driving through the Mojave around midnight, heading east toward Needles after spending the day in Barstow. We'd planned to stop for the night, but traffic had been light, and I figured I could make the rest of the drive before I got too tired. It was one of those clear desert nights where everything looks frozen in place. No wind, no movement, just stars and empty road. We'd been talking about nothing important. Plans for the weekend, her sister's new job, when the radio made this sharp popping sound. Then came static. Not the kind that fades in and out with bad reception, but this harsh, pulsing static that filled the car like white noise. I reached down and tried switching stations, but the dial moved on its own. The display flickered through frequencies, never landing on one long enough to hear anything. "Maybe we're losing signal," Emily said, though her voice sounded uncertain. I turned the radio off. The static kept going. It took me a second to realize the sound wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was deeper, like it was part of the car itself. Almost like the air around us was humming. I killed the ignition, and for half a second everything went silent. Then the static came back, louder. We looked at each other. I started the car again, thinking maybe it was some weird electrical glitch. The dashboard lights flickered. The clock on the radio display flashed 12:47, then 12:07, then blanked out completely. The headlights dimmed for a moment, but the engine sounded fine. I checked my phone. It was dead. Emily's too. Both had been charged earlier that evening. There was no cell service out there, but they wouldn't both die like that. "Let's just keep going," I said. "It's probably interference or something." She nodded, but I could tell she was nervous. Her hands were tight in her lap, watching the empty road ahead. We passed a faded sign for Goffs, still about 20 miles off. The desert stretched out on both sides, low hills in the distance, nothing but sand and scrub. The static finally cut out, and the sudden quiet made my ears ring. For a minute, I felt relief, until the radio display blinked again and came back on by itself. It started cycling through AM stations this time, landing on half-formed voices, snippets of talk that would cut off mid-word. I caught one clear phrase, something like, "ahead of time," before it scrambled into noise again. I switched it off for good. That's when we noticed the clock. It read 1:04. I stared at it, confused. "Didn't it say 12:40 something before?" Emily frowned. "Yeah, I think so." I pulled out my phone just to check the time, but it was still dead. Hers too. We hadn't been stopped that long, maybe a minute, two at most, when I'd turned the car off. The idea that the clock had jumped ahead 17 minutes didn't make any sense. We drove in silence for a while after that. The highway was so empty it felt unreal, just the headlights carving a tunnel through the darkness. No other cars, no lights from houses or gas stations. A few miles later, Emily pointed out the window. "What's that?" At first I didn't see it. Then I noticed a faint glow off to the right, above the horizon. Not white like headlights or yellow like a distant house light, more of a pale blue, shifting slightly like heat shimmer. It stayed there as we drove, always the same distance away. I slowed down to around 50, trying to make sense of it. There were no roads that way, no towns. The glow pulsed once, bright enough to throw a thin line of reflection across the windshield, then faded back to its usual faint shimmer. "Could it be a plane?" Emily asked. "Not moving like one," I said. It was just there, perfectly still. We kept watching it, waiting for it to change, but it didn't. Eventually it dimmed so much that we could barely tell if it was still there or if our eyes were just adjusting to the dark. Then, just as quietly as it had appeared, it went out completely. A few minutes after that, the static returned. It wasn't as loud this time, but it came in these slow, rhythmic bursts, like breathing through a broken speaker. I felt something tighten in my chest every time it flared up. I checked the clock again, still 1:04. I tapped the face of it, wondering if it had frozen. Emily leaned forward, staring at the dashboard. "Is the speedometer moving?" I looked. The needle was stuck at 0. We were clearly moving, doing about 50, but every gauge on the panel was frozen. The odometer light went dim, then out. The headlights started to flicker, just slightly, but enough to make the shadows on the road jump. I gripped the wheel tighter and pressed the gas. The car responded fine, but everything else looked wrong, like the power was draining, yet the engine kept going. After maybe 2 more miles, the static started breaking apart into fragments of what sounded like voices again. The first few were too garbled to make out, but then one came through, low, like a whisper, close to the microphone. It wasn't English, or if it was, the words were distorted beyond recognition. Emily turned the radio off again, but the noise didn't stop. That's when I realized it wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from everywhere, the dashboard, the vents, even the metal of the car. Then everything cut out at once. The static, the lights, the engine, dead silent. We coasted to a stop in the middle of the highway, surrounded by darkness so complete I couldn't see the edge of the road. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Emily reached over and grabbed my arm. "Don't get out," she said. I didn't plan to. We sat there, listening. There was nothing at first, just the sound of our own breathing. Then, far off, I heard this faint, low vibration. Not a hum exactly, more like the pressure you feel when a big truck passes close by, except there was no truck. It grew stronger for a few seconds, then faded. The car clock blinked once, then came back on. 1:21. The headlights flicked on by themselves. The engine turned over like it had never stopped. Every gauge jumped back to life. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, rebooting. We just stared at each other. "Let's get out of here," Emily said, barely above a whisper. I didn't argue. I pressed the gas and the car moved normally. Everything looked fine. The radio was off, the lights steady, the clock running like it should. The only strange thing left was this faint smell inside the car. Something metallic, almost like ozone after lightning. We didn't talk much the rest of the drive. We got into Needles around 2:10, pulled into a small motel, and sat in the parking lot for a while before going in. My phone showed 1:53 when we parked, but the clock in the car said 2:10. When I checked the trip distance the next morning, it didn't match what it should have been. We'd lost about 10 miles somewhere between Goffs and Needles, though we hadn't taken any turns or detours. The car's fine now, so are the phones. But sometimes when we drive at night and I catch a flicker of static on the radio, I still feel that same tightness in my chest. I don't know what happened out there. All I know is that something did. It was a little after 2 in the morning when I hit the fog. I was driving for a courier service out of Tacoma, heading south on I-5 with a van full of office equipment that needed to be dropped in Portland by sunrise. The stretch near the Columbia River gets foggy this time of year, but that night it was heavier than I'd ever seen. The bridge lights disappeared before I even reached the midpoint. I slowed down to about 30, hands tight on the wheel. The headlights barely touched the fog. It was like driving inside a cloud. The road ahead glowed faintly white, and beyond that, nothing. My wipers were on even though there wasn't any rain. I remember thinking how quiet it was, no cars ahead, none behind, just the low hum of the tires on the concrete. A minute or two in, I noticed a faint glow above me. At first, I figured it was the reflection of my own headlights bouncing off the fog, but then it shifted. I looked up through the windshield and saw several lights, 6 or 7 of them, arranged in a loose arc, gliding silently overhead. They weren't bright like airplane lights, more like a soft bluish-white, steady, not blinking. I rolled down the window to listen. Nothing. No rotor sound, no engines, just the faint hiss of fog moving past the van. I leaned forward, squinting up through the windshield. The lights moved together, too slow for a plane, and they didn't seem to be attached to anything I could see. They floated across the fog like they were part of it. I couldn't tell how high they were, maybe 100 feet, maybe 1,000. The fog made it impossible to judge distance. Then I realized the lights were matching my speed. I tested it. I eased off the gas down to 25. The lights slowed too, keeping the same distance overhead. When I sped up again, they followed. I don't know why, but I didn't feel scared yet. It was more like confusion. I'd seen weird stuff on night drives before, optical illusions, reflections, but this didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate. After about a minute of watching them, One of the lights drifted slightly out of formation, moving to the side, then back again. The others adjusted like they were tethered together somehow. I could see their glow reflected faintly in the fog around them, but never any outline or structure. I was halfway across the bridge by then. The fog was so dense, I couldn't even see the railings. My GPS lost signal. The phone screen flickered and went black for a second before restarting. The radio crackled with a burst of static, even though it had been off. I muttered something like, "What the hell is going on?" and gripped the wheel tighter. The lights suddenly rose higher, not fast, but steady, until they vanished completely into the fog. The glow faded, leaving me alone again in the thick white void. I kept driving, waiting for them to reappear, but they didn't. Just me, the fog, and the low hum of the van. When I came out on the other side of the bridge, the air cleared almost instantly. It was like breaking through a curtain. The fog just stopped. I remember blinking against the sudden brightness of the highway lamps. Everything looked normal again. But then I saw the cars. There were maybe 4 of them spaced out along the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. A couple of drivers were standing outside, looking confused. I slowed down and pulled over a few car lengths ahead of them. One guy waved me down, a middle-aged man in a windbreaker, eyes wide. He came up to my window and said, "Did you see it too?" I didn't answer right away. "See what?" I asked, though I already knew what he meant. "The lights," he said. "Over the bridge." I nodded once. "Yeah." He motioned toward the other cars. Everyone stopped around the same time. We thought there was an accident ahead, but then the lights just disappeared. I looked past him at the others. One woman was on her phone, pacing. Another guy was leaning against his car, looking up at the sky like he expected the lights to come back. I got out of the van. The air smelled damp and cold. I asked the guy what time he had, just trying to make small talk or maybe ground myself a little. He looked down at his watch. 2:27. That didn't sound right. I'd checked my phone before the fog, and it had been 2:09. The drive across the bridge should have taken maybe 3 or 4 minutes. I pulled my phone out. It read 2:14. I walked to the nearest car, a silver Honda with its hazard lights still blinking. The dash clock inside said 2:43. The woman who'd been pacing came over and said hers showed 2:19. Every car clock we checked was different. Someone joked weakly about how weird that was, but no one laughed. It wasn't funny. It was wrong in a way that didn't make sense. One of the guys said he'd lost GPS for a while in the fog, too. His phone had rebooted, just like mine. The woman said her music had cut out mid-song and wouldn't start again until she was off the bridge. We all just stood there for a few minutes, not really knowing what to do. The sky was perfectly clear above us, stars visible again, no trace of fog or light. Traffic started to pick up. Just a few cars at first, then more. Eventually, everyone drifted back to their vehicles. I sat in the van for a while before pulling back onto the road. I checked my dashboard clock again. It said 2:30. By the time I got to the delivery warehouse in Portland, the clock on my phone said 3:56, but the one in the van said 4:10. My route log, which automatically tracks time, had a blank gap between 2:11 and 2:28. I asked the dispatcher if the system ever glitched like that. He said no, not usually. The van's clock reset itself the next day when I turned it on, back to 12. The GPS worked fine, and there was no sign of any malfunction. I talked to Emily, the woman with the Honda, a few days later. She said her mechanic checked her car and couldn't find anything wrong either. The dashboard clock still ran 17 minutes fast, though. She said she thought about leaving it that way. I took the same route a week later, around the same time. No fog, no lights, just a quiet, empty bridge. I drove slower than usual, half expecting the radio to pop or the GPS to fail again, but nothing happened. Every now and then when I drive through fog, I find myself watching the sky instead of the road. Not really expecting anything, just watching. It's strange how something can happen in less than a minute and still make the world feel slightly off afterward, like a picture hung just a little crooked. I was driving through farmland in eastern Kansas around 2 in the morning. I'd been on the road since late evening, heading back from visiting my brother in Wichita. It was one of those stretches of highway where you can drive 20 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. just dark fields on both sides, the occasional windmill, and the low hum of the tires on the asphalt. I wasn't tired, exactly, but I was zoning out a bit, just trying to get home. The only light came from my headlights and the glow of the dashboard. Every now and then, a mailbox or a fence post would flash by. Then I noticed this red light behind me. At first, I figured it was a car way back in the distance. Just a single red dot, too far away to tell if it was one tail light or two. But what caught my attention was that it didn't seem to get any closer. I drove another few miles, checked again. It was still there, the same distance back, same brightness. I remember glancing at the clock. 2:14 a.m. I was maybe 40 minutes from home. The highway had dipped into a low, flat stretch where the land was completely open. No trees, no houses, just fields. I sped up to around 80 for a bit. When I looked again, the light was still there. Same spot. That got under my skin. I slowed down to 60. It didn't close the distance. I braked a little harder, down to 50, and it didn't shrink away either. It just hung there like it was matching me. I told myself it was probably some weird reflection, maybe a distant tower light bouncing off the rear window or something. But when I shifted slightly in my seat, the angle didn't change. The light was behind me, not above or off to the side. After a few more miles, I started to notice how steady it was. It didn't flicker, didn't wobble like a car's headlights on a bumpy road would. Just this fixed, glowing red point in the darkness. I checked the rear view again and again, convincing myself it had to be a vehicle. But no shape, no beams, nothing, just the light. There was this one turnoff coming up, an old gravel farm road I'd used before when cutting across the county. I decided to take it and see what the light did. I slowed down, flipped on my blinker, and made the turn. My headlights swept across a stretch of low grass and a fence line. The gravel crunched under my tires. When I glanced back, I expected the red light to pass by on the highway behind me. It didn't. It turned. It wasn't sudden. It just shifted its angle, followed the curve I'd made, and settled back into the same distance behind me, hovering over the road like before. That's when my stomach really dropped. I stopped thinking weird reflection and started thinking someone's screwing with me. I kept going for another half mile. The road was rough, with little dips and potholes, and I could see dust swirling in the beams of my taillights. But through it all, that red light stayed steady. Same height, same distance. I slowed again down to maybe 20, and it slowed too. At that point, I started to feel this kind of pressure in my chest, like that heavy, nervous feeling when you're about to do something stupid. I didn't know what to do. There weren't any houses nearby, no shoulder to pull onto, just endless farmland. I finally decided to stop completely. I eased to a stop on the right side of the road and threw it in park. My headlights shone out into an open field. Everything was dead quiet. No crickets, no wind. I looked up into the mirror. The red light was still there, perfectly still, maybe a couple 100 feet behind me. I sat there for a while just staring at it. My hands were tight on the wheel. I don't know why I didn't just drive off, but something in me wanted to see what it would do if I didn't move. About a minute passed. Then it started to move forward. It didn't bounce or sway like something attached to a vehicle. It just glided toward me, completely smooth, closing half the distance before stopping again. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I thought about throwing the car in reverse and gunning it, but I couldn't make myself move. Then, as I watched, it began to rise. Not fast, just a steady upward climb, like a balloon lifting into the air, except perfectly straight. No wobble, no sound. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. It went higher and higher until it was above the horizon line. Then, right when it reached a point where I'd have to crane my neck to see it, it blinked out. Gone. I stayed there for a long time after that, trying to listen for anything, an engine, maybe a drone buzzing, but there was nothing, just silence. I got out of the car at one point, even though my legs were shaking. The air was cool and damp. Gravel crunched under my boots. I looked up and saw a few stars, a faint wisp of clouds, but no red light anywhere. After a couple minutes, I got back in and started driving again. My hands were still trembling. I made it back to the highway, half expecting to see it waiting for me, but the sky was empty. The rest of the drive was quiet. I didn't see another car until I hit town. I pulled into a gas station that was open all night, parked under the bright lights, and just sat there. I checked my phone. It said 3:11 a.m. The drive from where I'd stopped to there shouldn't have taken that long. Maybe I was just sitting longer than I realized. I tried to tell myself it was a drone, some kid messing around maybe, but it didn't move like any drone I've seen. It didn't make a sound, and it kept perfectly level the whole time. When I finally got home, I parked the car and sat in the driveway for a while, headlights off, just watching the sky. I kept thinking I'd see that red light again out over the fields. I never did. But every time I drive that stretch of road now, I catch myself checking the mirror more than I should. There's this one section where the land opens up flat, and for a few seconds you can see miles of nothing behind you. I always look. I don't even know what I'm hoping to see. It was just after midnight when I left work that night. I'd stayed late to close up the small accounting office where I worked in Petaluma. It was mid-October, clear and cool, and the air had that damp chill that hangs around near the coast. The drive home to Sebastopol usually took about 20 minutes if the roads were empty, and that night they were. I remember thinking how dark it felt. No moon, no wind, just the sound of my tires and the hum of the old Honda. I took the back roads like I always did, cutting through the open farmland instead of sticking to the highway. It's faster that way and usually peaceful. There aren't many streetlights out there, so the stars were bright, or they should have been. For the first few miles, I could barely see them. I thought maybe the humidity had made the air hazy. About 5 minutes outside of town, I noticed 3 white lights above the field to my left. They were spaced perfectly apart and forming a triangle. I assumed it was a plane at first. The Sonoma County Airport isn't far. But the lights weren't flashing. They were steady, soft white, not bright like landing lights. I slowed a little, leaning forward over the steering wheel. The lights weren't moving like a plane either. They were just gliding, completely silent. The shape didn't turn or tilt. It just kept the same orientation, moving parallel to the road like it was pacing me. I rolled down my window to listen, expecting the distant hum of engines. Nothing. Just the faint sound of crickets and the wind rushing past the car. For maybe 30 seconds, I told myself it was a drone. A big one, maybe some kind of survey equipment. But the lights were too far apart for that, easily wider than a small plane's wingspan. And the way it moved didn't look mechanical. It was smooth in a way that made my stomach tighten. I slowed down to about 30, keeping my eyes on it. The triangle held perfectly steady above the field, maybe 100 feet up. No blinking lights, no change in color, no sound. Then it turned, not like a plane banking or a helicopter pivoting. The whole shape rotated in place, flat, so the point that had been leading suddenly shifted 90 degrees. The lights stayed in perfect formation the whole time. It was like watching a compass needle rotate, slow and deliberate. I don't know why, but I pulled over. I think I wanted to see it without the motion of the car. I stopped by the side of the road and turned off the engine. The night went dead quiet. No frogs, no insects, no wind. I could hear my own breathing. The lights stopped rotating and hovered there. I sat for a second, just staring, then reached for my phone. The screen glared too bright in the dark, and by the time I got the camera app open, the lights had started to move again. This time, they tilted backward, like the whole shape was angling upward. I hit record and aimed the phone out the driver's side window, trying to keep the lights in frame. They tilted higher, slower, and then, without warning, shot straight up. Not fast like a rocket, but impossibly smooth. No acceleration, no sound. 1 second they were there, the next they were higher, smaller, and then gone. The stars behind them looked normal again, like nothing had been there. I just sat there for a while, the phone still recording the empty sky. My heart was pounding, and I felt that weird tightness in my chest that comes from holding your breath too long. I didn't even realize until later that the recording didn't save. The app crashed, and when I reopened it, the last clip was from earlier that afternoon. I started the car again and got back on the road. For the next mile or so, I kept looking up through the windshield, half expecting the lights to come back. The radio, which had been off, suddenly turned on by itself. Static. No station. I reached to turn it off, but before I touched the knob, the static faded into silence again. The road dipped into a grove of eucalyptus trees, and when I came out the other side, my dashboard clock read 12:58. It had been 12:32 when I pulled over. I don't remember sitting that long. I hadn't even turned the car off for more than a minute or two. I was sure of it. I checked my phone clock. It said 12:40. That mismatch sat in my head the rest of the drive home. I told myself the car clock must have been wrong. Maybe it reset when the radio glitched. But I'd looked at it before leaving work, and it was right then. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a while with the lights off. My street was quiet. A few porch lights on, one cat crossing the road. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the sky again. Everything looked normal. Stars, faint glow from town in the distance. No noise, no movement. I checked the car clock again before going inside. 1:03. My phone said 12:46. I didn't tell anyone right away. The next morning I went to work like usual, but the memory of it sat in my head like something unfinished. When I got home that night, I checked the dash clock again. It was still 17 minutes fast. I asked my coworker, Jared, if he'd ever seen strange lights around that area. He said sometimes you see helicopters from the Coast Guard or private planes coming in low, but I didn't mention how the lights moved. Later that week, I drove that same stretch again. Same time, same road. Nothing. Just stars and the dark shape of fields. No fog, no clouds. I even parked in the same place for a few minutes, but it was silent and empty. I tried not to think about it too much after that, but sometimes I catch myself replaying how the lights moved. The rotation, the tilt, the way they lifted. It didn't look like flight. It looked like something changing direction in a way it shouldn't be able to. The clock in my car never went back to normal. I eventually had the battery replaced, and that fixed it, but before that, it kept that exact 17-minute difference. One night, a couple weeks later, I was driving home from dinner around the same time, and I saw a plane passing overhead. Just a normal small aircraft with blinking red and white lights. It should have looked ordinary, but watching it made me tense up. For a second, I thought it was slowing down midair like before, but it wasn't. It was just my eyes waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. That's the thing that stayed with me the most. Not fear exactly, but that feeling of waiting. Like part of me expects to see those three lights again every time I look up at the sky. I was driving back to Asheville from a client meeting in Boone. It was around 10 at night, maybe a little later. I'd left later than I planned, and by the time I hit the stretch of 221 that winds through the mountains, there wasn't another car in sight. It had been raining off and on all evening, that misty kind of mountain rain that hangs in the air, and the pavement was still slick from it. My wipers were on low, and I had the defrost going just to keep the windshield from fogging up. That road's quiet even during the day, but at night it feels completely deserted. No streetlights, just the occasional reflector nailed to a post. The trees close in on both sides, and the turns are sharp enough that you can't see more than a few hundred feet ahead at a time. I was maybe 20 minutes south of Linville Falls when I saw the parked car. It was pulled over on a gravel turnout, half off the road, headlights off, no hazards. At first, I thought someone had broken down. I slowed a bit as I came around the curve because you don't see many cars stopped up there that late. As my headlights swept across the turnout, I saw two people standing next to the car. They were both on the passenger side facing the tree line, not the road. One was taller, maybe a man, and the other shorter, possibly a woman, though it was hard to tell through the haze and rain. They weren't moving, just standing side by side, looking into the woods. The car looked like an older model sedan, maybe dark blue or gray, and there was something strange about the way it sat. The angle of it didn't look right, like it wasn't fully on level ground. My first thought was maybe they'd pulled over to deal with a flat tire, but then why stand facing the woods? I slowed to maybe 30, keeping my eyes on them as I got closer. Neither turned or reacted to my headlights at all, not even a glance. Most people instinctively look when a car is coming toward them on a dark road, but they stayed completely still. As I passed, my headlights flickered. Just once, but everything went black for a full second. My heart jumped because that road is pitch black without them. Then, as suddenly as they went out, they came back on. The dashboard lights, the radio, everything had stayed on fine. Just the headlights had cut. When the beams came back, the turnout was empty. The car, the two people, gone. I mean, completely gone. I hit the brakes hard, tires skidding a bit on the wet road. My first thought was that I'd somehow passed the wrong spot, but I could still see the gravel shoulder where the car had been. It was maybe 30 feet back. Nothing was there now. I sat in the middle of the road for a second, trying to make sense of it. There hadn't been any sound. No engine starting, no door slam, nothing. Just gone. I threw it in reverse, backed up a bit, and stopped opposite the turnout. My high beams caught nothing but wet gravel, trees, and fog. I remember rolling the window down a little, listening. It was dead quiet except for the rain dripping from the trees. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe a minute. My stomach felt tight, and I couldn't decide whether to get out or just keep driving. Finally, I pulled forward again and drove slowly past. I looked for tire tracks or footprints, anything. But the rain had already softened the gravel enough that I couldn't see much. It struck me that the car hadn't been running when I saw it. No exhaust, no light, no interior glow. The rest of the drive home felt strange. I kept catching myself, checking the mirrors every few seconds. Every shadow looked like headlights coming around a bend. My radio cut out a few times. Not static, just dead silence for a few beats, then came back like nothing happened. When I got to Marion, I stopped for gas, even though I didn't really need it. I think I just wanted to see another person. There was a woman behind the counter, middle-aged, friendly enough. I asked her if there had been any accidents up the mountain that night. She said not that she'd heard. I didn't explain why I was asking. I got back on the highway and reached home around midnight. My hands were still trembling a little when I parked. The next morning, I called my coworker John, who lives up near Linville. I told him about what I saw. Not the part about the car vanishing, just that I'd passed one pulled over with people standing by it. He said he hadn't heard about any trouble on that stretch, but he'd keep an eye out. That bugged me, though. If the car had broken down, somebody should have reported it, or it would have still been there by morning. So that afternoon, I drove back up there. The weather was clear this time. Bright sunlight, no fog. I found the same turnout easily. It's the only one on that bend. There was nothing there but gravel and a few tire marks that could have been from anyone. I walked a little way into the trees where the two people had been facing. The ground was soft from the rain, and I saw what looked like faint impressions. Not really footprints, just disturbances in the leaves and mud, but they didn't lead anywhere. What caught my attention was a strip of broken branches about shoulder height, maybe 10 feet into the woods. It looked like something wide had passed through, bending them downward. Not a car, obviously, more like if a strong gust had blown through, except it hadn't been windy at all the night before. I went maybe 20 yards in before I decided I'd had enough. The woods were too quiet. Even in daylight, it felt heavy, like the air itself was thicker. A week went by, and I tried to stop thinking about it. I didn't tell anyone else. It sounded too weird when I replayed it in my head. Two people, facing the woods, lights flicker, then nothing. A couple of nights later, I was sitting in my driveway about to head inside when I noticed my headlights dim slightly, just for a split second, like a brownout. The engine didn't falter. It was subtle enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but the timing of it brought everything back. I started avoiding that route after dark. If I had to drive through, I'd do it during the day. The few times I've gone since, I keep my eyes on the road, trying not to even glance at that turnout. But it's impossible not to. There's this urge to look, like my brain's checking if something's there again. One time, months later, I did see another car pulled over in the exact same spot. A white pickup this time. Middle of the afternoon, clear weather. Nobody standing beside it, but something about it made me slow down anyway. As I passed, I noticed the driver's door was open, and a man was sitting inside, staring at the trees. Not moving, not turning his head, just staring straight ahead into the woods like he didn't even notice me. I thought about pulling over and asking if he was okay, but I didn't. I just kept driving. I've told myself a dozen times there's probably a normal explanation. Some trick of the fog, a reflection, headlights malfunctioning. Maybe the two people were just hikers who left right as my lights flickered. But I've replayed the timing over and over, and there wasn't enough time for anyone to move a car, much less disappear into the woods without a sound. I still don't understand what I saw that night. All I know is that every time I drive a mountain road now and see a parked car on the shoulder, I slow down just a little. Not to help, not to look closer, but to make sure it doesn't vanish when my lights hit it. I was driving back from my sister's place in Peoria. It was late, close to midnight, and I'd taken the back roads because I can't stand the interstate at night. All the headlights and semis make me tense. Route 29 cuts through farmland for miles, and that stretch between Glassford and Manito is basically empty except for a few mailboxes and old barns. I had the window cracked just enough to let the air in, and the radio was low. Some local AM station playing old country songs. The sky was overcast but bright in that weird way it gets when the moon's hiding behind clouds. I remember passing a gas station about 20 minutes earlier, and after that it was just flat land and cornfields. The road curved left a bit, then straightened, and that's when I saw it. A vertical column of pale blue light, like a beam from a spotlight, but narrower, solid-looking somehow, shining straight down from the clouds into a cornfield on my right. It wasn't moving. Not even slightly. It didn't flicker or spread out like a normal beam does when it hits dust or fog. It was just a single smooth line of light, maybe 15 or 20 feet across, bright enough that I could see the tops of the corn stalks glowing faintly where it hit. I slowed down because I thought maybe it was a police chopper or some construction thing, but there wasn't any sound at all. No hum, no blades, nothing. Just my tires on the asphalt. The light looked weirdly perfect, like it wasn't cutting through the air, like it was just there. It didn't make sense. I rolled down the window more and leaned toward the passenger side to get a better look. The radio had gone fuzzy, not total static, but a kind of low, warbling interference. It reminded me of when you drive under power lines, except there weren't any around. I pulled over onto the shoulder because my curiosity got the better of me. I turned off my headlights and just sat there for a second, watching that light. From where I was parked, I could see the whole column end to end, maybe 50 yards out in the field. The clouds above it were glowing faintly blue where the beam touched them. The weirdest thing was how steady it all looked. No movement, no flickering. The light didn't seem to come from anything. Like the top of it just disappeared into the clouds. I kept expecting to hear an engine, but it stayed completely silent. After maybe 30 seconds, I noticed my dashboard clock. The numbers were faint, dimmer than usual. The temperature gauge needle was twitching. The radio had gone to total static now, just a soft hiss. I turned the knob to shut it off, but it didn't respond right away. The knob turned, but the sound stayed for a few seconds, then finally cut. I thought maybe the alternator was going, which would have been just my luck that late at night. So I shifted back into drive, figuring I'd keep moving and see if the light changed. As I rolled forward, the road curved slightly again, putting me almost directly beneath the thing. The moment I passed under it, everything in the car shut off. The headlights, the dash, even the engine. It was like someone hit a master switch. I didn't even have time to react. No sputtering, no dimming. Just total dead silence and darkness. The car coasted forward a few feet, tires crunching the edge of the pavement, before everything came back on all at once. Engine running, lights blazing, radio crackling back to life. The clock jumped ahead 3 minutes, and the temperature gauge settled back where it should have been. I pulled over again 100 yards later, heart hammering, trying to process what just happened. The light was gone. I mean, completely. No fadings, heck, no flicker. Just gone. The sky looked totally normal again, clouds drifting, nothing unusual. I sat there for a long time. The cornfield looked like any other field in the dark, maybe a little fog hanging near the ground. I stepped out for a second, thinking maybe there'd be a sound, insects, wind, anything, but it was dead quiet. Even the air felt strange, heavy somehow. I didn't stay out of the car long, my hands were shaking, and I just wanted to get moving again. Once I got a few miles down the road, I started seeing normal signs of life again. A porch light here, a lit barn window there. It felt like the world had snapped back to normal. When I finally hit town, I pulled into a Casey's to grab a drink and calm down. The guy behind the counter, probably my age, looked half asleep. I asked him what time it was, just to check. He pointed to the clock above the register, 12:43. My dashboard clock said 12:53, 10 minutes difference. I don't know why, but that detail stuck with me more than anything else. I even pulled out my phone to check, but it had reset itself. The screen flashed like it had just powered on, showing 12:53 2. I didn't mention the light to the guy. I just paid for my drink and left. On the drive home, I kept looking in the mirrors, half expecting to see that blue glow behind me again, but there was nothing, just empty road and the faint hum of the tires. The next morning, I drove back out there. I figured maybe I'd find something, scorch marks, a piece of equipment, maybe even just tire tracks from somebody else who stopped. But the shoulder looked undisturbed, and the field itself was ordinary. Corn plants, dew on the leaves, nothing flattened or burned. I walked out a bit, close to where I thought the beam had touched down. The only thing I noticed was that the air still smelled faintly metallic, like after lightning. A few days later, I mentioned it to my sister, just in passing. She said she'd heard about spotlights being used for crop dusting, but I've lived in Illinois my whole life. Nobody sprays at midnight under cloud cover, and those beams don't cut out your engine. The car's worked fine ever since. I had the alternator checked just to be sure, and the mechanic said it was solid. He did say my battery terminals looked unusually clean, like they'd been scrubbed. I hadn't touched them. Sometimes I think maybe it was just some kind of freak electrical thing, a power surge, ball lightning, whatever. But I keep coming back to how precise that light looked, like it wasn't spreading or fading at the edges, like it was holding its shape. And I can't explain why everything shut down for exactly 3 seconds, or why my clock jumped ahead 3 minutes after, or why my phone reset itself. That stretch of road looks completely normal in daylight. I've driven it a dozen times since. But every time I pass that bend, I feel this weird hesitation, like I'm waiting for the blue light to drop back down from the clouds again. It never has. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever that was, it wasn't some random glitch. It felt too deliberate, too focused, like it knew exactly where I was going to be. That night, I wasn't the only one out there either. When I replay it in my head, I swear I remember seeing faint headlights in the distance on the other side of the field, like another car had stopped too, but I never saw it pass me later. Sometimes I think about that more than the light itself. We were coming back from dinner at my sister's place in Lawton. It was late, close to 11, and we didn't feel like taking the main route back to Duncan. Normally it's a 45-minute drive, but there's a back road we've used for years that cuts about 10 minutes off. It's 2-lane, quiet, goes through farm country, and hits Highway 81 just north of town. I could probably drive it blindfolded. It was one of those warm, still Oklahoma nights. No wind, no crickets, no other cars, just the hum of our tires and the low murmur of the radio. My wife, Erin, was half asleep in the passenger seat with her head leaned against the window. I remember looking over at her and thinking how empty the road felt. Usually, you see at least a few house lights or a tractor in the distance, but that night it was just black fields on both sides. We turned off the main road around 11:05. I glanced at the clock because I always check the time when we take that route. It's habit, I guess, just to see how much time we're saving. A few miles in, something felt off. The road seemed darker than usual, like my headlights weren't reaching as far ahead. The asphalt looked almost dull, like it was absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. I thought maybe there was dust on the bulbs or fog I couldn't see. Erin stirred a little and asked where we were. I told her we were almost halfway. She looked out the window and said, "I don't remember it being this empty." I didn't either. Normally there are fence posts, maybe a few mailboxes or barns in the distance, but all we saw was open land and a few patches of tall grass along the shoulder. I slowed down, thinking maybe we'd missed a turn somehow. But there aren't that many turns on that road, just one fork near a feed store about 15 minutes in. I didn't remember seeing it. The GPS on my phone wasn't loading right. It showed the blue dot, but the road under it was blank, like it hadn't rendered yet. Aaron's phone was the same, no service. That wasn't weird by itself, coverage out there's spotty, but it made the silence feel heavier. A few minutes later, I saw what looked like headlights up ahead. I felt relieved, figuring it was another car, maybe confirming we were still on the right road. But as we got closer, the light just dimmed. It wasn't a car. It was like a glow sitting low to the ground on the left side of the road, maybe 50 yards ahead. I slowed almost to a stop as we passed it. Whatever it was, maybe a big floodlight or one of those portable generators, it gave off this pale, even light. No wires, no poles, no sound. Just sitting in the field. Aaron said quietly, "That's not someone's yard." I agreed, but we didn't stop. We drove another 10 minutes, and I realized we still hadn't hit the feed store turn. That's when I really started to feel uneasy. I checked the clock, 11:34. It didn't make sense. That stretch should have taken 15, 20 minutes tops. Erin started watching the roadside more closely. "I don't recognize any of this," she said. The weird thing was, I didn't either. It wasn't like the road had changed, exactly. It was still the same two-lane asphalt, but the shape of it, the way it curved and dipped, felt different. Too many long, shallow turns where there should have been straights. After a while, the air inside the car got weirdly stuffy, even though the AC was on. I rolled the window a bit, and the outside air smelled like metal, like hot iron or blood. I remember that part clearly. We didn't talk for a while after that. Aaron kept glancing behind us. I think we both had this feeling that something was following, even though there was nothing in the mirror but blackness. The next landmark I remember seeing was a cluster of trees on the right side. That part of the drive should have been all open farmland, no trees that close to the road. I slowed down, thinking maybe it would help me get my bearings, but the trees looked wrong somehow. Too tall, too close together. There was no fence, no driveway, just this wall of dark branches. Aaron said, "Don't stop," so I didn't. We passed them, and the road straightened again. I looked at the clock, 12:19. My stomach dropped. I actually said out loud, "How the hell is it after midnight?" Aaron checked her phone, still no service, but the time matched. We'd been driving over an hour, and we weren't even back to the highway yet. That shortcut should have taken 30 minutes, tops. A few minutes later, we saw a light ahead again. This time, it was brighter, whiter, like the reflection off a road sign or a gas station canopy. We both sat up, relieved. But when we got closer, the light didn't look like it was coming from anything. It was just hovering above the road, maybe 20 feet up. I slowed to a crawl, maybe 10 miles an hour. The light was silent, steady, and perfectly round. No glare, no shadows, just there. We passed under it, and I swear the car's engine sputtered. Not off, but like the RPMs dipped for half a second. Erin's phone screen flickered on by itself, even though she hadn't touched it. It showed the home screen for a moment, then went black again. After that, the road started to look more familiar, but not in the way it should have. It was like someone had rearranged the landmarks. There was an old billboard I remembered, but it was facing the wrong direction. A windmill that should have been on the right side was on the left. I kept driving, because what else could I do? When we finally reached the highway sign, it felt like coming out of a tunnel. Suddenly, there were normal lights again, headlights from other cars, the glow from a convenience store. Erin exhaled hard, like she'd been holding her breath. I looked at the clock again, 12:48. I didn't believe it. I actually pulled into a gas station and checked the dash clock against my phone, then the clock inside the store. All the same, somehow, that shortcut had taken us an hour and 40 minutes. We hadn't stopped once. There were no long delays, no detours, no traffic, just that endless stretch of road that felt like it didn't want to end. We didn't talk about it much that night. When we got home, we both just went straight to bed. I woke up around 4 in the morning and checked the mileage on the car, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The trip meter said 119 miles. It should have been around 80. The next day, I drove the same route by myself during daylight. Everything looked normal. The feed store was right where it should be. The road curves were the same as always. I even timed it. 45 minutes, exactly. No extra miles, no strange lights, no missing landmarks. I don't know what happened that night. We weren't tired enough to hallucinate. We hadn't been drinking. It was just a normal drive on a road we knew like the back of our hands. But every now and then, when we take that route, always during the day now, I'll catch myself glancing at the clock, half expecting to see it jump an hour ahead. And I always notice the same faint metallic smell in the air right before the turnoff, even with the windows rolled up. It was a little after 11 when I started the drive back from visiting my brother in Cheyenne. I'd stayed later than I meant to. We'd watched the end of a Rockies game, and I didn't feel like crashing on his couch, so I figured I'd just make the 2-hour drive home to Scottsbluff. I'd done it plenty of times before. That stretch of Highway 85 between Wyoming and Nebraska isn't much to look at, just long, empty blacktop cutting through flat farmland and ranches. At night, it feels like the middle of nowhere. The sky was clear, the kind of deep blue-black you only get away from city lights. I could see every star. There wasn't much traffic, maybe one semi every 20 minutes, so I kept the cruise control on and some old rock playing low. I first noticed the cluster about halfway between Torrington and Lingle. It was low in the sky ahead of me, toward the southeast, and I thought it was just a bright patch of stars. But something about it looked off. The points of light were close together, maybe 8 or 9 of them, and they were brighter than anything else around, almost bluish white. At first, I assumed it was a plane formation, maybe military, though I'd never seen anything like that there. They were moving together, slow and steady, like a small constellation gliding across the horizon. I watched them for a while, trying to figure it out. Every so often, I'd look back at the road or check my mirrors, and then glance up again. The pattern stayed the same, a tight bunch of lights sliding left to right. Then I looked down for maybe 3 seconds. I remember checking my odometer or the gas gauge, and when I looked back up, they were in a straight line. Not stretched out like a shooting star trail, but lined up perfectly, evenly spaced, cutting diagonally across the sky. It was so clean it didn't look natural. My first thought was maybe satellites, but they were too close together and too low, and they weren't following a steady arc. The whole line just drifted slowly, staying the same distance above the horizon. I turned the music down and rolled my window a little. No sound except the tires on the asphalt and wind. For the next 10 minutes, they stayed there, matching my direction like I was pacing them. Once or twice, I thought I saw one light blink out, then reappear. The weirdest part was how they didn't twinkle like stars, just this steady, cold glow. The road was dead straight, and there weren't any good pull-offs, so I just kept driving. After a while, I convinced myself it had to be something explainable, maybe some flight pattern I didn't know about. I was tired too. It was late, and the drive gets hypnotic after a while. A little past Huntley, the lights began to shift again. Slowly at first, then more deliberately, the line bent into a shallow curve, like a smile. Then the ends of the curve lifted upward until the whole formation was shaped like an arc. That's when I pulled over. I eased onto the shoulder, left the engine running, and stepped out. The air was cold, quiet, except for crickets and the faint ticking of my cooling brakes. The lights hung there, silent and perfectly still for a few seconds, then started to move again. Not drifting this time, but shifting in place. The arc folded inward, the points drawing toward the center until they clustered again, back into almost the same tight group I'd first seen. It was strange how smooth it looked. No jerking or flickering, just fluid motion, like something alive. I stared for what felt like maybe a minute. Then everything went black. Not the sky. The sky was still there, but my headlights, the dash, the taillights, even the little red glow from the radio. All of it blinked off at once. The engine was still running fine, but every light in or on the truck was dead. I remember standing there, frozen, my hands still on the doorframe, staring up at those lights while my truck idled beside me in total darkness. The only sound was the low rumble of the engine and my own breathing. Then, just as fast, everything came back on. Headlights, dash lights, radio. The volume blared for a second before I turned it down. When I looked back up, the cluster was gone. The sky was empty. I stood there for a bit, scanning the horizon. Nothing. Just normal stars. Eventually, I got back in and pulled onto the road. I kept checking the mirrors, the sky, half expecting the lights to reappear. They didn't. A few miles later, I noticed the clock on my dash was off. It read 12:43, but my phone said 12:26. I thought maybe it had reset when the power cut out, but it didn't start from 12 lev, like it would if the battery disconnected. It had jumped forward, like time had skipped. I didn't think too much about it then, I just wanted to get home. The rest of the drive was quiet, but something felt different. The air in the cab felt heavier, like the pressure had changed. My ears kept popping even though I wasn't gaining elevation. I remember glancing in the mirror and catching a faint flash, a single white light far behind me, low on the horizon. I couldn't tell if it was a distant car or something else. When I finally hit the Nebraska line and the first gas station appeared, I pulled in just to have lights and people around. The cashier was some kid, maybe 19 or 20, earbuds in, scrolling on his phone. I asked if they'd had a power surge a little while ago. He said no, everything had been fine. On my way out, I looked up again. Clear sky, nothing moving. When I got home around 1:30, I parked and sat there for a minute before going inside. My hands were shaking just slightly. I noticed my headlights flickered again when I killed the ignition. Not completely off this time, just a quick dim. That bugged me enough that I checked the battery terminals the next day. Everything was tight, no corrosion. The truck started fine, lights normal. I kept thinking maybe I'd seen some new kind of satellite thing, and I even looked up those Starlink trains, but they move in one direction in a perfect line and vanish over the horizon. What I saw changed shape. It moved too slow for that, too deliberate. A week later, driving home from work, I saw something faintly similar. Just two bright points low in the sky, moving together. For a second, I thought it was happening again. But then one light turned red and I realized it was a plane banking toward the airport. I laughed out loud, more out of relief than anything. Still, that first night has stuck with me. I keep trying to remember if I could have mixed up where the stars were, or maybe the power cut was just coincidence. But the way those lights rearranged, perfectly geometric, like they were following some pattern, I can't explain that part away. Sometimes I'll drive that same route late, just to test myself. I'll glance out at the horizon, half hoping I won't see anything unusual. But every time, when I catch a glimpse of a bright cluster or a distant plane, I feel that same pull in my gut, that quiet waiting feeling, like I'm not done with whatever I saw that night. And I'll watch a little too long, just to make sure the stars stay where they're supposed to. I was driving home from the hospital that night, finishing my shift as a nurse. It was one of those late July nights in Iowa where the air sticks to your skin, even inside the car with the AC blasting. The sky was clear, a deep, saturated black, and the moon had already slipped behind some clouds. My route home takes me through a stretch of back roads between Cedar Falls and my apartment in Waterloo, 2 lanes winding through cornfields and the occasional farm. I've driven it 100 times alone at night, and it's never felt threatening, just quiet, familiar. I remember it started out normal. The radio was playing soft jazz low, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The headlights cut cleanly through the darkness, illuminating the corn that pressed close to the road. I passed the old red barn near the Jensen farm, its paint peeling, the silo dark against the horizon. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a car coming toward me, reflected in the distance. The headlights glinted on something metallic ahead, a quick flicker that caught my eye. I slowed a little, squinting, but there was no other vehicle. The road was empty. Nothing behind me in the mirrors. My pulse picked up slightly. I chalked it up to fatigue and the low adrenaline you get from driving alone at night. I kept going, my foot easing off the accelerator, and the reflection stayed there just ahead. I swear it wasn't just a single point of light either. It had depth, like the headlights were bouncing off an actual object. I tried to figure out if it was some farm equipment left out in a field, maybe the side of a tractor or a silvery roof of a grain bin catching my light. But everything along that stretch is dark at night. No farm equipment was supposed to be out there. As I got closer, the metallic gleam shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the angle of the reflection had changed. Not because I moved, I could tell. My headlights were steady, the car wasn't tilting. The reflection seemed to tilt on its own. It gave this odd impression like a mirror slowly turning away. I blinked, and it moved again, tilting farther. Then it started rising, not like a plane or helicopter, but almost smoothly, deliberately, straight up. I expected some kind of engine noise, some sound at all, but there was nothing. Absolute silence, except for my own tires on the asphalt. My stomach turned a little, and I felt a sudden awareness of how alone I was out there. I slowed even more, down to maybe 15 miles an hour, keeping my eyes locked on it. By the time I was directly underneath where I thought it had been, the reflection was gone. Not behind me, not ahead, not in the fields, just gone. I checked the mirrors frantically, scanning the sky, the corn, the road. Nothing. It was like it had disappeared entirely. I kept driving, heart still racing, trying to make sense of it. My brain kept testing explanations. A stray piece of tin in the field, a metallic sign, a trick of the headlights. But I know that stretch of road, there's nothing like that there. And it had moved, tilted, lifted, gone. Nothing stationary reflects like that. A few minutes later, I saw something else that made me slow again. The corn on the left side of the road had a shimmer to it, like wet metal. At first, I thought it was dew, or maybe the moon breaking through clouds for a second. But the shimmer moved slightly, just enough to look intentional. Not like wind, because the air was dead calm. I passed it slowly, staring straight ahead, and when I glanced in the side mirror, it was gone, like it had never been there. By the time I reached the intersection where the road meets the highway, I was gripping the wheel too tightly, my knuckles white. The lights of the town felt almost unreal after that stretch of black fields. Everything was normal again, houses, street lamps, the occasional late-night jogger, but I kept glancing at the sky, half expecting the metallic sheen to return. I pulled into my apartment complex, parked, and sat for a long moment in the driver's seat, breathing, trying to process it. I thought maybe I'd imagined the reflection entirely, my brain playing tricks after a 12-hour shift. But I can't explain the way it tilted, the smoothness of its rise, the complete silence. Not a plane, not a drone, not a bird. Nothing I've ever seen behaves like that. I went inside, left the lights on in my apartment, and kept thinking about it as I showered. My phone buzzed with some work texts, and I checked them, but my mind kept drifting back to the road, to that metallic gleam, tilting, rising. The next morning, I drove that same route again, in daylight. Everything looked the same as usual, the old barn, the cornfields, the gravel edges of the road, nothing out of place. No metallic sheen anywhere, no trace of the movement I saw. Tried to explain it to my friend Nate that evening when we had a drink, but he just laughed it off. Probably a trick of your lights, he said, but it didn't feel like a trick. I don't think I've ever noticed headlights reflecting off anything in the same way before. I haven't taken that back road at night since. I stick to the highway now, lights overhead, other cars around, but sometimes when I'm driving late and the moon is out, I catch a flash in the corner of my eye, a glint in the fields, and I instinctively slow down. Half of me wants to look, the other half wants to keep driving straight. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it. And I can't make myself forget the way it moved, smooth and deliberate, rising into the sky without a sound. Even now, when I drive by that stretch during the day, my stomach tightens for a moment, waiting, just in case it decides to show itself again. I left the office later than I meant to that night, around 10:30, and the drive home on Route 47 through the countryside of central Illinois was supposed to be routine. An hour of empty two-lane highway and some straight gravel roads once you leave the town limits. It had been one of those heavy, humid summer nights, the kind where the air sticks to your skin and the windows fog if you roll them up too fast. The moon was out, bright behind a thin layer of clouds, casting just enough light to make the cornfields on either side of the road shimmer faintly. I remember hitting a stretch where the road narrows and dips between two slight rises in the land, a place I've driven hundreds of times. That's when I first noticed a low hum in the air. Not a car, not a plane, something deeper, vibrating, almost physical, like the sound was resonating through the asphalt into the tires. I glanced up and saw the moonlight disappear. It wasn't cloudy, at least not in a patchy way. It was like a shadow had moved directly over it. I slowed instinctively, foot easing off the accelerator. The hum got louder, the kind of vibration that makes the windshield rattle just slightly, the car's frame itself thrumming in sync. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. and that's when I saw it. It was a dark mass, impossibly low, gliding silently over the fields. I couldn't make out a shape, not really, just a shadow against the clouds. The corn below didn't move, the trees didn't sway, but the air seemed thicker somehow, heavier, and that vibration stayed constant as it passed overhead. My heart was racing, but my instincts told me to stay in the car and keep driving. The mass moved past, and the hum faded, leaving the night almost unnaturally quiet. I exhaled slowly and tried to convince myself it was some kind of aircraft I'd never noticed. Military helicopters sometimes flew this route at night, but they make noise, and this didn't. Not a single rotor, no afterburner, nothing. Just that deep vibration and the dark shape blotting the moon. I kept driving, but something felt off. The road didn't look the same. I passed the old railroad crossing, but it didn't line up with the mile marker I expected. My GPS chimed, which I found reassuring, except the next turn it suggested didn't exist. I laughed nervously. Right, I muttered to myself, the road doesn't exist. I glanced down at the screen. It insisted I turn around, retracing the last 5 miles I'd already driven. I hesitated, wondering if the GPS had glitched. The satellite signal looked fine. Still, every time I tried to continue forward, the app recalculated, saying the road ahead was inaccessible, missing, or private property. I glanced at the fields on either side. Empty. Nothing but corn and dirt tracks. By this point, my hands were gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I slowed to 20 miles per hour and looked behind me in the mirror. Nothing. No headlights, no hint that another vehicle had been following, just the empty 2 lanes stretching back toward town. I considered pulling off to the shoulder to collect myself, but the ditch was soft from a recent storm, and I didn't want to risk getting stuck. I kept moving, cautiously, the vibration from before now replaced by a low ringing in my ears. Not loud, but enough to make the silence unbearable. The weirdness didn't stop. As I passed a bend in the road, I thought I saw something moving in the fields to my left. At first, I assumed it was a deer, but the silhouette was wrong. Tall, thin, and upright. It didn't dart or leap like a deer would. It just stood there, half hidden in the corn, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. No rustle of leaves, no sound, just nothing. I drove for a long stretch, watching for anything else, anything familiar, anything human. The GPS continued to insist that the road ahead didn't exist, forcing me to loop back, even though in reality I was on a perfectly good asphalt road. The more I tried to ignore it, the more insistently it recalculated. Eventually, I took a deep breath and decided to just follow its directions, looping back the way I'd come. The sky remained dark and quiet. I didn't see the shadow again, at least not clearly, but sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I thought I caught something moving in the tree line, just at the edge of the fields. Every time I looked directly, it vanished. I drove slowly, following the same stretch I had already passed, and the GPS finally stopped recalculating. I pulled off at a small lit gas station just off the highway. The lights felt like a relief. There were a couple of trucks there, idling, the drivers talking quietly. I tried to explain to one of them about the dark mass and the GPS, but he just shrugged. "Must have been a power glitch or something," he said. I nodded, not quite believing him. Back on the highway, I started to feel more normal, though the night air still smelled faintly metallic, like iron or wet metal, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing in my mirrors, expecting headlights or a shadow, but the road was empty. I drove home cautiously, taking every familiar turn slowly, checking every field I passed. At home, I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence of the night around my house felt different. Comfortable, ordinary. I stepped inside and checked my GPS again. Signal was fine, everything normal, roads intact and accounted for. I slept poorly that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that shadow passing over the moon, the vibration resonating through my body. I can't explain what I saw. It was too dark, too low, too solid for a plane, too quiet for a helicopter. And the way my GPS rerouted me, like it was refusing to let me continue, didn't make sense either. The next night, I drove that same route again. The road was normal, the fields were normal, the GPS never blinked. Everything was fine. I didn't see the dark shape, and I didn't hear the low hum. But sometimes when I close my eyes at work or on a quiet evening, I swear I feel that vibration in my chest, like a warning or a pulse from something just out of reach. I don't know what it was, and I haven't tried to look it up. There's nothing like it reported nearby. I tell myself it was a trick of the night, a weird atmospheric effect. But part of me knows that's not enough to explain how solid it felt, how my windshield vibrated in time with it, or why my GPS suddenly decided the road ahead wasn't there at all. I still drive that stretch sometimes late at night, but I keep the radio on low. I watch the clouds and the moon, half expecting something to block it again. And I always keep a hand near the wheel, ready for whatever might be hiding just above the fields, silent and low, out of sight but not entirely gone. I was driving home from my sister's place in northern Kansas that night. It was past midnight, and the highway was empty except for the occasional pair of headlights far ahead or behind. The air was still and warm, thick with the scent of hay and freshly cut corn. I had the windows cracked a little, the engine humming smoothly, and the radio playing softly. Classic rock, one of those late-night stations that only shows up if you're far enough from town. I don't usually pay much attention to the road out there. It's just a stretch of two-lane asphalt with cornfields stretching out on either side, fading into the black. But that night, I felt an odd sense of emptiness, not just the lack of cars. Everything smelled heavier than usual, almost metallic. I thought maybe it was just the wind, or my imagination. I was about halfway to my exit when I saw it, or rather, when it happened. 1 second the sky looked normal, the stars scattered and dim behind thin clouds, the moon just peeking out. The next, everything was flooded with white light. Not a flash like lightning, not flickering, just pure, bright white. So intense, it made the car's interior glow, even though I hadn't touched the lights. I slammed on the brakes, my chest tightening. The radio cut out mid-song, the sound replaced by static for a second, then dead silence. I sat there, staring through the windshield, expecting thunder or some sound to follow, like a storm rolling in. But there was nothing. No roar, no wind, no hum from the highway. Just the light, which faded slowly, leaving the world outside the car looking sharper somehow. The cornfield edges outlined in the moonlight as though the air itself had become cleaner, more solid. I reached for the radio, fiddling with the dials, trying to get some static back, some normal noise to break the silence. Nothing. I even tried my phone, no signal, screen dead for a few moments, then flickering back on with the usual time and battery, but no reception. I exhaled, shakily, my hands gripping the wheel. For the first time in years, driving alone at night didn't feel routine. It felt like the world had paused. I started moving again, cautiously, keeping the speed low. My headlights cut through the corn, the yellowish beams glancing off the stalks in a way that looked almost wrong, too bright, as if the light itself was thicker than usual. I thought I saw movement in the field, something shifting just beyond the reach of the beams, but every time I looked directly, nothing was there. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe a trick of the shadows. I didn't dare stop to check. The next stretch of highway had a gentle curve. I remember thinking I should see the old farmstead up on the left side. It's a landmark I used to mark my halfway point, but it wasn't there. Not even a light in the farmhouse. The air still felt heavier, quieter. Not silent exactly, but like sound itself had lost its edge. My tires made almost no noise on the asphalt. I could hear my own breathing, slow and uneven, and the faint clink of my seatbelt buckle when I shifted. A few minutes later, I passed under a stand of trees that usually casts a shadow across the road. That night, the shadows weren't there. The trees looked normal, their branches moving lightly in the slight breeze, but the road beneath them was clear, almost artificially lit in a soft white tone. I blinked and had to force myself to keep moving. I remember seeing a flash again, smaller this time, in the corner of my eye, almost like a reflection bouncing off something shiny in the cornfield. I swerved slightly, heart hammering, and looked back to see nothing. No shape, no reflective surface, just dark stalks stretching out to the horizon. The sense of being watched prickled at my neck. I couldn't see anyone or anything, but I felt it anyway. The silence stretched on. I tried humming to myself, tried talking aloud, but my voice sounded muted, swallowed by the heavy night air. Every now and then, I would glance in the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights, some sign that another car was following. But it was empty. Absolute blackness behind me, no road signs, no moonlight glinting on anything metal. About 10 miles down the highway, I finally saw lights from a distant truck stop. My relief was immediate and visceral. I increased speed cautiously, the familiar hum of the tires on asphalt suddenly seeming louder, more comforting. The radio flickered back to life halfway there, music warbling for a moment before settling into normal static. My phone signal returned as well, the bars blinking weakly but consistently. Pulling into the lot, I parked under the brightest light I could find and sat there for a long time. I checked the clock, 12:48. Only about 10 minutes had passed since the flash, though it felt like hours. I tried to tell myself it was a lightning strike far off, or maybe some weird atmospheric thing that made the fields and sky glow for a second, but there was no thunder, no storm. The air was calm the entire time. I went inside, bought a coffee, and sat at one of the tables watching the lot. Everything was normal. Cars parked, drivers getting gas, the hum of fluorescent lights inside the store. Still, I kept glancing at the sky through the windows, half expecting that brightness to return, the world outside to drain of sound again. Driving home later, on the highway lit with familiar street lamps, the night felt ordinary again. I passed the cornfields, the familiar bends in the road, the old farmstead up on the hill. Nothing moved, nothing glimmered. Still, for a long time afterward, I found myself checking the rearview mirror when I was alone, listening to the hum of the tires as if it might carry some warning. I don't know what caused the flash, the silence, the strange intensity of the night. I don't know why my radio cut out or why the world felt muted for that stretch of highway. All I know is that something about that night felt deliberate, like the world paused for a reason I couldn't see. I don't drive that highway at night anymore unless I have to. And when I do, I keep the music loud, the windows up, and my eyes scanning both the sky and the fields. The world felt bigger that night, emptier, like something was just beyond the edges of what I could see. Even now, months later, I notice the silence in the distance when I'm out on country roads at night, and I remember that white flash and the way sound itself seemed to vanish for a minute as the world waited. My name's Ben Carter, and I was driving home from a maintenance shift at the marina, which is how I found myself on County Road 12 just after 2 in the morning. It was one of those thick summer nights you remember because the air felt like a blanket, humid enough that the inside of the truck smelled faintly of the salt water and diesel from earlier in the night. The county road runs close to the salt marshes for a stretch, old live oaks arching over parts of it, so the headlights make these long, moving shadows when you pass. I'd driven that road 100 times, and I knew every bend by feel. About 10 miles out of town, I saw it. A pair of red hazard lights blinking on the shoulder up ahead. From where I was, they looked like any other late-night roadside stop. A small car, maybe a hatchback, pulled off with the 2 red triangles flashing. I figured the driver had a flat, and I pulled into the lane behind them, slowing down. Out here, people don't pull all the way off because the soft shoulder will grab you. They sit half on the pavement and wait. The first odd thing happened before I even reached their car. My radio had been playing low, some old country station, and the signal went tinny and weak like it sometimes does when you go under a bridge. I flipped the knob, but the dial kept spinning and the display started showing nonsense numbers. The truck's clock blinked for a second and then read 2:07. Which was right. But the battery icon on my phone dropped from 3 bars to 0, and then came back like it had reconnected for a breath. I told myself it was stress and cheap electronics. I do a lot of night driving, so I'm used to funky signals. Still, it made the dark feel thicker. As I rolled forward, I could make out the driver sitting behind the wheel. A woman, maybe mid-50s, hands folded in her lap. There was a kid in the back with a blanket over his knees. I could see the shape of his head turned toward the window. Nobody was outside. They weren't waving for help or anything. Just sitting there with the hazards on. I craned my neck to see better, and that's when the second weird thing happened. The crickets stopped. It was sudden, like someone had rung a bell and all the night insects cut off. The marsh fell silent, and the only sound was the soft hiss of my tires and the pump of my own breath. I remember thinking, that's dumb. Crickets don't just quit, but they did. It made the air feel fragile, like it could tear. The woman inside the car turned her head slowly to look at me, then returned her gaze to the trees as if she'd seen something there. She didn't roll down her window. I eased the truck up another 10 yards and killed the engine. I should have left it running. I know that now. Habit and caution. I switched the dome light on for a second so they could see me and then snapped it off. The hazard lights kept blinking, bright and steady, a slow 2-beat blink you always associate with a disabled car. Up close, the red was a little warm, not the harsh LED blink I'm used to, softer, almost fuzzy at the edges. The kid's face was turned away. The woman's eyes were fixed on the tree line. I cracked my window a fraction to listen. Nothing. Not a dog bark, not a distant truck. Just silence so complete my ears rang. I mouthed, "You okay?" But it sounded ridiculous inside the empty cab. She nodded once, slowly, then her mouth flattened like she was holding something back. She looked tired. I was about to get out and check tires when the hazard lights did the thing that's still loud in my head. They lifted. It wasn't a flicker. The red points rose a foot, then 2, then kept going as if detached from the car. They stayed the same distance apart like a little red scaffold and drifted outward from the bumper. At first, I thought I was seeing a reflection, headlights off something reflective, but the pair of lights kept a perfect even spacing, as if on invisible poles. They rose up level with the bottom of the oak branches and then, impossibly, slipped into the leaves and moved sideways along the canopy. The motion was slow, composed, like watching someone walk, but much, much quieter. For a second, I was sure they'd get tangled in the branches or strike the tree trunk, but they didn't. They passed through the leaves without rustling them. Not a single twig moved. It was like the lights were floating in a different rule book, and the physical world hummed around them politely. The woman in the car blinked once, and then she looked like she was going to say something. I stepped out of the truck before she could, because my feet felt heavy, and in the sudden streetlight her face was pale and wet with sweat. "Ma'am?" I said. Voice higher than I meant. She didn't answer right away. She watched the lights disappear into the trees, and the motion made the hair on my arms stand up. They rose to maybe 20 feet and then dimmed. Not slowly, but like a dimmer switch being turned down, and the red points simply went out. The spaces where they had been were ordinary dark leaves again. The silence stayed for a few more seconds, then a single tree frog started calling like nothing happened at all, and the marsh noise slowly crept back in, a soft, layered sound that felt like a release. The dome light in my truck clicked off. The mundane returned too. The hum of a generator a mile down, a far-off dog, the faint rattle of a passing semi on the highway. The woman wiped a hand across her face, and when she turned to me she was crying quietly, not sobbing, just these little shaky breaths. "I don't know," she said. "We pulled over because the car wouldn't start. We thought something was wrong." Her voice was flat. "Then the lights, they just went up. He saw them first, my boy. He said they were like lanterns." The kid in the back was quiet then, watching me with big, unsettled eyes. He didn't speak. I asked him if he'd been scared. He nodded a little. I checked their tires because that's what you do. Tires were fine. Battery light on the dash was off. The engine turned over when she took the key and the car started like nothing had happened. The hazard light button worked, the lights blinked in place as normal. Mechanically, the car was perfect. The woman apologized about the trouble and offered me money for my time. I wouldn't take it, I said, and she asked if I'd call someone just to come get them if they needed it. I found myself staring at the trees where the lights had gone. There was nothing to mark where they'd passed. No scorch marks, no fallen leaves, no broken branches hung at odd angles. The oaks looked like oaks. The moon peeked out from behind a cloud and threw a pale smear across the road. My radio came back on then, the country song picking up mid-verse like the station had never been interrupted. It was like they were trying to get away, the woman said suddenly. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel and glanced at me, or like they were being led. I didn't have anything to add that would make sense, so I told her to get going and to take the first gas station in town. They pulled out slowly and turned onto the highway. Hazards off, nothing else in the rear view. For a while, I sat in my truck with my hands in my lap and watched the taillights go small and then disappear. On the radio, the DJ was talking about a fishing tournament in the bay this weekend. The mundane normalcy of that announcer's voice felt dissonant, like a recording over which something had been edited out. When I finally started the engine, it complained for a long second like it had been sleeping, and then it fired. I drove the rest of the way home, too aware of the dark trees along the roadside, as if their branches might be holding something they'd just set down. That night, I lay awake listening for anything. Cars, distant thunder, the creak of the apartment building settling, but nothing out of the ordinary came. At work the next day, I checked my truck over more than usual. No damage, no change. I called the non-emergency line later just to say someone had seen odd lights in the trees. The officer said there'd been no other reports. I didn't tell him everything. I don't know why. It would have sounded crazy. Red hazard lights rising and drifting like lanterns into the live oaks. People asked me later why I didn't stop the woman, ask more questions, follow the lights into the trees. I wasn't sure if I could have. Maybe I would have. Maybe I was selfish and wanted to be home. Or maybe I felt there was a line you don't cross when something about the world unhooks like that. A private moment between a person and whatever that was. I don't know. I still drive past that stretch sometimes when I can't avoid it, always a little slower and with the radio turned up. The trees look the same in daylight as they did before. Gnarled trunks, Spanish moss, the same tape of sky between the branches. I haven't seen red points of light rise up since then. I don't know if they were an odd weather thing, a trick of reflections I misread in the dark, or something else entirely. But every now and then when I'm stopped at a light or pulling over to answer my phone and the night is quiet, I look toward those oaks and find myself thinking of soft red lights moving level with the leaves. And I can feel the small, careful breath I took when they slipped through the branches without making a sound. It was around 11 when I turned off Route 16 and started up the narrow road that led to my little place in the White Mountains. I worked late that night at the kitchen, line cook, overnight prep, and I was tired in that specific, stubborn way where your hands feel heavy, but your mind is oddly sharp. The stretch up to the cabin is one I'd driven a bunch of times. Tight switchbacks, low stone walls in a few places, trees that close in so the road feels like a tunnel. I'd done it in winter and summer, in fog and when the air was clear, so I knew to keep it slow and expect anything. Right from the first bend, something felt off. The night was clear, cold and thin, but there was this smell in the air that I didn't expect, like wet metal or an old battery. It hit me when I rolled down the window for a second to clear the cigarette smoke from the car. I remember thinking, that's odd. No storms, no power lines nearby. I shrugged it off and kept climbing. A mile or so in, the radio started to act up. It was on a low, familiar classic rock station, and then it dipped into static for a beat, came back, and then briefly played a different show, news in a voice that didn't fit the station, before snapping back to the song. The dial didn't move. My phone, sitting in the cup holder, popped to no signal for a second and then nailed full bars again. Little glitches, I told myself. Old car, older head unit. It's the kind of thing that feels creepy at 2 a.m, but has a practical explanation if you're tired enough to want one. Further up, the trees closed around the road and the canopy swallowed the moonlight. The headlights made these little rectangles on the asphalt and cut off at the edge of the trees. The road does a run of 3 quick S-bends there. You have to be careful, especially with deer. I took it slow, down to maybe 25, engine low, just enough so I could feel the line of the road through the wheel. On the second S, I noticed a small white light sitting in the distance along the edge of the road, about the same distance ahead of me as the next bend. At first I thought it was a reflector or one of those little safety markers you sometimes get on guardrails, but as I approached, it didn't change size or angle the way a reflector would. It held steady, a clean, small point of white, like a tiny headlight, but too precise to be that. I slowed more because that's what you do. My head swung left and right before the bend, and the light kept the same place in front of me. It wasn't moving relative to the road. If anything, it seemed to be mirroring the curve just ahead, always the same distance from my bumper. Maybe I got a little smug, like I'd chased down whatever it was by bringing my speed down. Like a lot of late-night drivers, I'm aware my imagination fills gaps. Still, the steadiness bothered me. When I was barely a car length from it, I realized whatever I was seeing was not more than a few feet off the pavement. That up-close detail made it weirder. It didn't really cast a glow on the road the way my headlights did. No broad beam, just a bright dot, very white. I've driven in places where people have flashlights on the side of the road or where reflective stickers catch your eye, but this thing had a kind of presence to it. Not alive, quiet, but like it had intentions, like it was waiting for me to catch up. Around the bend, the road narrowed and I had to steer gently. My tires made that small, steady whisper on wet leaves. I checked my mirrors out of habit and the light was still there, keeping pace, perfectly aligned. I eased the car to a stop at the next pullout. Habit again, a safety check. The white light stopped at the same time. I sat there for a minute, the engine ticking as it cooled, and thought about just backing up and driving past. Instead, I watched the light. It didn't flicker, it didn't pulse. It simply hung there, a white point, as if someone had pinned a star to the road. There were other small things I noticed while I sat. The night noise was thinner than usual. Where I'd normally hear a steady chorus of frogs or the occasional owl, there was this flatness to the soundscape, like someone had turned down the volume on the woods. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from the kitchen asking if I was on my way, but when I looked, the screen was blank, then woke up with the message like nothing had happened. The cabin's LED clock, I thought for a second, flashed forward a minute and then righted itself. Little displacements, not alarming by themselves, but enough to make the night feel hinged. After maybe 3 minutes, I put it back in gear and eased back onto the road. The white light fell into step instantly, holding the same distance ahead like a metronome. For the next 20 minutes, it did this: curve, hold, straight, hold, left, right, hold. It never drew closer, never fell back. When another car approached from the opposite direction, its beams slid past us, and the driver blinked once and moved on. No change in the white dot's behavior. Once I passed a small turnout where a pair of fishermen had their truck pulled over, their campfire low. They looked up as I drove by, but didn't react to the light. It was like the thing existed in a narrow lane of perception that didn't touch everyone. At one point, on a long, sweeping right-hander, a deer stepped out on the opposite shoulder and froze mid-stride. Usually deer bolt, or at least stare and then move. This one stood and watched. Its ears were forward, body still. It felt wrong the way it watched the light. Then it eased back into the trees like it had been told to step aside. I know that sounds strange, but that's exactly how it felt, like a gentle command. I tried talking to it out loud at one point, nothing meaningful, meant more to break the tension. "Okay, what are you?" My voice was swallowed by the car interior. No response. The light held its place like a patient animal, clean and indifferent. Around the last major switchback before the ridge, I hit full darkness. No moon through the canopy, and my headlights reflected back with a damp sheen from the leaves. The dot again kept the same distance, framing the edge of the next turn the way I would. I found myself trusting it more than I wanted to admit, because it was doing a job I do for myself when I'm drowsy, keeping my pace even, keeping me from overshooting curves. Halfway up that switchback, my foot found the brake out of habit, and the car slowed to a stop. The white light stopped too, just ahead on the curve. I killed the engine to listen, another of those stupid human impulses, caught by the stillness, and for the first time since the day started, all that breathing I'd been doing felt loud. My ears popped slightly as if the air pressure changed, even though the road was level there. I opened the door because I couldn't stand the sitting there anymore, that small, ridiculous need to verify. Cold air hit me in a way that made the hairs on my forearm prickle. The light was maybe 20 feet ahead, small and exact, and when I stepped down onto the pavement, it seemed to hold its place, maybe even tilt slightly away like a shy animal would. I walked the distance in 3 long steps and then slowed, because whatever this was, up close it didn't resolve into anything I could name. It didn't have edges, it was more a point of precision, like the tip of a laser. No heat, no hum, no ripple on the air. I crouched like a kid because I wanted to be very small and careful. I swept my hand out to touch where it had hung, and my fingers met only night air and cold stone. Nothing. I made a small laugh that felt thin in the darkness, and the sound vanished up into the trees. When I stood up, the light was gone. Not dimmed, not shifted, just gone. I looked down the road and up into the canopy where moonlight leaked through the leaves and there was nothing. The world looked ordinary, perhaps even a little mundane, like the moment itself had sighed and returned to routine. I walked back to the Subaru and sat down slowly. My hands were damp. I restarted the car and this time the radio hummed steady, no glitches. My phone had full bars and the text from the kitchen sat there like a marker. You okay? I thumbed back. Yeah, running late. And told myself the whole thing was a trick of battery, a reflection, a thing I could explain if I tried. The drive up the final pitch to the cabin felt like walking back into the living room after someone's called out your name. You know you're safe, but you're jittery. I parked, shut the engine off, and sat for a while in the dark, listening to the normal creaks of the place settling. The next morning, I walked the stretch of road in daylight. There was nothing. No footprints, no scorch, no marker where I'd stood. The leaves were dry and whole. People at the deli later that day told me the owls had been surprisingly quiet that night, but that could be coincidence. I never figured out what the light was. I haven't told a lot of folks because most of them would just say I was too tired after a late shift or that I should lay off coffee. Maybe they're right. Maybe I misread a headlight reflection or a handheld on the shoulder. I don't like the idea of that being the whole story, though. I can't explain the steadiness, how it matched every curve without lag. And I can't explain the way the natural sounds thinned around it or why the deer froze and didn't bolt. I don't know why it vanished when I got out, as if it respected the boundary between standing on pavement and stepping into somebody else's night. I still take that road, but now I slow more than I used to, keep my eyes forward and my hands on the wheel. Every so often, I glance a little past the next bend and wait for that small white point to be there like a friend or a sign. Mostly, there's nothing. Mostly the night is just the night. But sometimes, when a cloud shifts and leaves a patch of sky bright as a coin, my eyes catch a place on the road where the light could be. And I think about stepping out. I don't usually. I drive on and the light, wherever it goes, keeps whatever it's doing to itself. I was on I-80 about 2 in the morning, coming back from a client site in Des Moines. The highway was the kind of empty then that feels like someone turned off the world for a while. Mile after mile of taillights and reflectors, the occasional semi in the distance. I had the cruise set to 70, coffee cold in the cup holder, and a cheap dash cam mounted to the windshield because my boss insists we document runs for liability. The air was clear and cool. There'd been a light shower earlier, so the road had that clean, faintly metallic smell. Somewhere past Newton, I noticed a pair of cars up ahead, one closer to the center lane, and one tucked a little toward the shoulder. They weren't close enough to be tailgating each other, but they were pacing together, like they were traveling the same little convoy. I don't know why, but I slowed a bit to match them. Maybe because 2 cars at that hour felt safer than one. They kept a steady gap as I fell in behind. The lead car was an older sedan, boxy, not flashy, and the second was a small SUV. Both had their taillights on, regular red, nothing special. For a while, I just watched them move, the minor comfort of other people somewhere on the road. After a few miles, it started to get odd. First, the radio started cutting in and out. I had it tuned to a local classic rock station, but the signal went thin, then back, then thin again. At one point, it snapped to static and a faint voice I couldn't make out, like an old AM frequency bleeding through when the music came back. I thumbed the tuning knob, and the display flashed for a second like it was trying to grab something, then steadied. My phone, which had been sitting face up on the passenger seat, flashed to no service for a beat, and then back to full bars. Little glitches, I thought. The night messes with cheap electronics sometimes. The 2 cars ahead didn't act like normal drivers. They kept the exact same distance from each other, switching lanes together when a slow semi appeared, then settling back. They seemed to be communicating without turning signal indicators on, as if they both knew what the other would do next. Every time I considered passing, the lead car would ease up by a mile or 2 an hour and keep that same gap again, like we were all part of a group that didn't want to break up. It put me on edge, more than it should have. A stretch of the interstate out there runs straight for ages. No exits, no overpasses, just open cornfields and sky. On that straight, the weirdness intensified. I noticed the mile markers looked off. One read 135, then the next read 142 farther down, like someone had shifted their numbering. I checked my dash clock. It was a normal 2:14. The lead car maintained a steady 68. The SUV behind it matched without flicker. Then, without warning, both cars' taillights went out. Not blinking, not dimming, they simply went dark at the same exact second. I remember thinking at first they must have both turned them off to signal something, but hazard lights would have given flash and blink. This was a silence of illumination. The road behind me was suddenly a ribbon of nothing. My fingers tightened on the wheel. For a moment, I couldn't tell if they'd pulled onto the shoulder and shut everything down. With no taillights, all I saw were two dark shapes where the cars had been. I flicked my high beams on and they cut through the night, but the shapes remained oddly unmoving, as if coated in matte shadow. The sound of the highway was the same, tires humming, distant trucks. Nothing to indicate a crash or an emergency. I eased forward, pulled into the left lane, and passed the place where their taillights had been. Both cars were still there, side by side, stationary in lane, silhouettes under the highway lights, but with no red glow at all. The driver in the sedan had his left hand on the steering wheel, palm up, like he was waiting. He didn't look at me. The SUV's brake lights were dark too. I could see a reflection on his rear window from the street lamps, but the actual brake lights were blacked out. I rolled down my window and called out, "You guys okay?" My voice sounded small and absurd on that long stretch. The sedan's driver turned his head slowly to the side, and for a second, I could see his face in profile, mid-30s maybe, tired. But he said nothing. Then he reached out, clicked the hazards on, and the two little triangles blinked in perfect sync. The red came back, flashing in rhythm, and the world reclaimed a familiar look. It was nothing like the previous void. It felt cheap and human again. A minute later, every dash of electronics I had on me hiccuped at once. The dashcam's timestamp jumped forward by nearly 8 minutes, like it had lost time. When I glanced at my phone, the lock screen said 2:23, even though I remembered the clock showing 2:15 when everything went dark. I'd been staring at the road the whole time. I didn't remember stopping or turning my head. I checked the app on the dashcam when I pulled off at the next rest area because the little quirks had begun to stack up in a way that nagged. The footage was normal until the straightaway. Then, for a stretch that should have been about 7 minutes, the video was absolute black. No glitching frames, no frozen image, just a clean black block of footage with audio that showed only low static. Nothing from the car, no tires, no voices. The timeline resumed with everything back in place. The footage showing my passing the two cars with hazards blinking, the same sedan driver turning his head, the highway rolling by like nothing had happened. The camera's clock read 2:23 when video returned. I sat in the truck, staring at that black gap for longer than I should have. I checked the camera mount, the SD card slot. Everything physically looked fine. The system info said the card had recorded continuously. I rewound, watched the lead up again, the taillights going out on cue. The audio before the gap had a thin hum. The audio during showed a flat line. My stomach clenched. I'm not someone who jumps to strange conclusions, but I couldn't make the footage line up with what my eyes remembered feeling. I called my wife from the rest area, told her I'd be a little late and why. I tried to explain the blackout on the video and how the mile markers seemed wrong, and how both cars had turned their hazards on at the same time, as if they'd been rehearsing it. She told me to come home safe and not to overthink it. It was the practical thing to say, so I said thanks and hung up. But even while I drove the last 30 minutes home, the road felt different. I kept checking mirrors, expecting to see lights vanish again like a trick that could repeat. Home felt predictably ordinary. The porch light burned, the neighbor's TV glow seeped through curtains. I parked, took the camera out, tried another playback, same clean black section. I uploaded the file to my laptop to see if software could read something there, some hidden frame or corrupted bit. The black block was still a void. The audio track had no car noises during that period. My heart settled in a different place then, not fear for my safety so much as this quiet dislocation. part of an hour that my senses could not recover, recorded as if someone had painted over it with black. I thought about going back the next night to drive that straight again to see if the same pair of cars would be there, to test if the markers really were off. I wanted to find a mundane explanation, a wiring fault, a bad microchip, a prank, anything. I told myself I was being childish and that sleep and coffee would make it smaller. In the end, I didn't go back that night. I went to bed, and my dreams ran through static and highway lights. People ask why I didn't follow the cars all the way into town or flag someone down at the rest area. Part of it is logistics. You don't get off the interstate in the middle of the night unless you have to. Part of it was an odd, reluctant respect for whatever strange boundary I'd crossed. The two cars didn't vanish. They were there when I passed. The world resumed. The dashcam had a hole that technology could not explain. I still drive that stretch sometimes. I keep the dashcam rolling, and I always check the footage when I get home. Nothing else so far has uploaded into a black square. But I watch the rearview now with a different muscle in my neck, like an old reflex. If I see a pair of cars paced together ahead of me, I slow down and keep my distance. Because I don't like long, straight stretches at 2 in the morning where the lights can go out and the recording will show only black. I was running late, which is how I ended up on Highway 101 with the dusk still settling into the Pacific, like someone pulling a blanket over the ocean. I'd finished a night shift at the cannery in Newport, grabbed a coffee that tasted like burnt rope, and pointed the truck north. It was the kind of route I'd done 100 times. A long ribbon of black between cliffs and dark water, the occasional lighthouse wink, fog pockets hanging off the sea like ghosts. Right after the Yaquina Bay Bridge, the radio went thin. It started as the little skip you get when a station is weak, and then it leaned hard into static until the announcer's voice turned to mush. I thumbed the dial. The display flashed something that looked like a code, and then steadied on the next song as if nothing had happened. That sort of thing was boringly normal on this stretch. Bad reception, goofy head units. So I didn't think more about it. I still had that tinny coffee buzz in me, and the miles ahead seemed ordinary. The first odd thing was the seals. I passed the little turnout where people stopped to look at the water, and the usual chorus of seals barking was gone. It was a sound I associated with that curve, kind of a background sock of the coast, and when it wasn't there, the silence felt conspicuous. I told myself the seals could be anywhere, maybe deeper out, but the absence felt like an empty chair at a dinner table. It made the air look different. Halfway up a straight stretch, the headlights caught something ahead, a shift in the sky more than in the road. The stars, which had been scattered thick over the ocean, dimmed like someone had crossed their hands in front of them. I slowed out of reflex. My hands felt a little clumsy on the wheel, like I'd been driving without thinking. The truck's dash clock blinked once and went an odd shade of blue for a second, like a monitor waking. I blinked too, and the color was gone. I won't lie, a part of me expected the wind to shift, some storm cloud to roll across. There was no wind. The air was close and smelled faintly of iron and the sea, as if a penny had been dropped in the lane. My phone, propped on the dash, slid from 3 bars to 0, and then back in a heartbeat. Small things that don't add up make you aware of small things that did. When it passed over me, it was like someone closed the lid on a box of stars. Not a streaking meteor, not a shadow like a passing plane. 1 second, the black sky glittered. The next, all that space above the road was a single solid absence, an edge devoid of anything. It wasn't just dark. It was a cutout, a hole in the stars maybe half a mile wide that moved across on an invisible track. There was no sound. The only thing that told me anything had happened at all was how my chest felt. A pressure, not like someone sitting on me, but the tightness you get at altitude change. A deep compression that made my lungs feel thick and my heartbeat louder in my ears. My first stupid impulse was to look for an airplane, a blimp, anything mechanical. The sky had none of the telltale cues. No flashing lights, no haze of prop wash, nothing to show motion. The object, if that's what it was, didn't worry the truck's mirrors. My rear view showed the highway stretching behind, taillights like beads. The engine didn't hiccup. My hands and feet worked the controls the same. My whole body had registered that pressure, though, like a door closing somewhere behind my sternum. I drove on because that's what you do. You keep going until you don't. For the next mile, I kept looking up at the place the sky had been sucked taut, expecting to see it again. The radio returned to a clear signal as if someone had flipped a switch. I tried to tell myself I'd seen cloud cover or some atmospheric trick, those nights when temperature and moisture make the stars wink, but what I'd seen had edges. It had a shape that didn't fade like clouds do. It had moved with the sort of deliberate slowness that made me feel like an animal being watched from above. Then the car clock blinked forward 3 minutes. I remember thinking on some raw level that time had been fiddled with, like a tape that someone had fast-forwarded a few ticks. The GPS recomputed for a second and showed me right where I was. Not that that meant much. My stomach, instead of settling, kept doing that sideways lurch you get when you think you misremember a turn. There were flashpoints of small weirdness after that. A roadside sign that should have read, "Caution, 45 mema per hour," had its numerals inverted for a second and then righted themselves. A previous driver's taillight wavered like a candle, went dark, then came back. Twice the foghorn from the lighthouse blared when I knew the horn was on a longer interval. The least defensible explanation for these moments was simple malfunction, wires, glare, tired eyes. But the accumulation of small wrongness made the big wrongness feel less impossible. The actual crossing was on a long, empty stretch between cliffs where the ocean felt like it crouched down and listened. I crested that hill and looked up with my stupid human habit of being vain about the night sky, and the stars disappeared again, right across the road this time. The absence sat over the asphalt like a shadow someone had nailed to the world. I slowed, not from a need to slow, but because my body would not let me do otherwise. There was no wind noise, no distant hum of engines, no whisper of rush from the object. Silence felt like a blanket folded thick and laid over my ears. It blocked the stars for maybe 5 or 6 seconds. 5 or 6 seconds of a sky with no punctuation in it. I remember the pressure in my chest deepening with each second. I could feel blood in my teeth. I told myself to breathe shallow, to not twist around and look useless. When the stars came back, they returned like someone had scratched the dust off a blackboard. Sudden and wholly ordinary, as if a light had been turned back on. I stopped the truck on the shoulder 2 bends later because I needed to sit with the aftertaste of it. The engine ticked. My hands trembled when I took my key out. I climbed out because some part of me wanted to know if there was a shadow on the world, if there were scorch marks, some sign that whatever had passed over me had touched the road. The air outside tasted the same. Salt, diesel, the faint copper tang. There was nothing on the pavement, nothing on the guardrail. The cliffs were the cliffs. The waves were washing like always against stone. A couple in a Subaru passed going the other way and slowed as they went by. The man in the driver's seat rolled down his window and asked if I was all right. I told him what I could, how the sky had gone blank, how my chest had tightened. And all I could hear in my own voice was how ridiculous it probably sounded. He nodded as if he understood worry, and then he glanced up and squinted. "You mean right there?" he said, pointing a hand, and for a second I thought maybe he'd seen it too. But his face folded into something like the shrug of a man who'd seen the world play tricks before. "Weird fog earlier," he added. He drove off, and the taillights tailed into the distance. I drove the rest of the way home like someone holding their breath without meaning to. The normal markers, billboards, the bakery sign with the neon loaf, the little church with the cross, fell back into place. The city lights felt tender and regular, and a relief. At the stoplight 2 blocks from my apartment, I realized the pressure in my chest had eased, but not entirely gone. It was the kind of leftover tension you have after getting your hand too close to a hot pan. I told my roommate when I got in, partly because I needed to say the thing out loud, something crossed the road above me. There were no lights, no sound, no just the stars cut out. He said I should call the station, the airport, someone. But I didn't. I cleaned the coffee out of the pot, paced the kitchen, and left a window open to the night because some part of me needed to test the ordinary air. It smelled the same as always. The next day I drove the same stretch in daylight. The cliffs looked smaller in the sun. The lighthouse was a white tooth against blue. Nothing in the guardrail, no scorch, no depression, nothing to show a thing had passed over the asphalt. Everyone I spoke to offered reasonable answers: weather, optical illusion, jet contrail at the wrong angle. They all used the words that soothe. None explained the way my chest had tightened, or the way the stars had been gone for a handful of seconds. I still drive that route sometimes. I think about the quiet a lot, how sounds seem to retreat like a tide and leave a pressure behind as if the air itself had weight. I don't sleep outside my windows anymore, and I leave the radio on. I don't know what the thing was or why it looked like a hole in the sky. I only know what I felt in those seconds. The sky falling quiet, my heartbeat played up against my ribs, and the stars coming back as if nothing had happened at all. I was coming back from a late closing at the hardware store, swept the floor, locked up, counted the register, so I didn't leave until about 11:40. The route I take home from town is a back road that cuts through a patchwork of pastures and scrub in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's the kind of road where the high beams don't bounce off much, except the occasional reflector and the eyes of a cow if you're unlucky. That night the sky was low and humid, the moon hidden by long, threadbare clouds. The road smelled like wet leaves and oil. The turnout lights on Route 87 looked like small yellow coins in the distance. I had the heater on low, my jacket across the passenger seat, and some talk radio murmuring in the background. It was a tired, routine drive. The first odd thing was the radio cutting out in a patch of trees, just static for a few seconds, like someone had put a blanket over the speakers. Then the host's voice came back as if nothing had happened. I'd experienced that before on the same road. Old wiring, dead-headed antenna. I told myself that, rolled the knob, and kept going. A mile or two in the fog thickened a little, not dense, but enough to smear the light from my headlights. The field to my left looked darker than the field to my right, like it had swallowed the light. I slowed to 40 because my eyes were starting to play tricks and I didn't want to trust them. That's when I saw it. A deer standing in the middle of the lane, completely still, head up, eyes fixed on the tree line to my right. The headlights lit it like a stage lamp, fur a matte gray, the sheen on its flank, breath pluming in a small white puff I could see in peripheral vision, but not directly. You expect deer to bolt when you hit the lights. That's what every driving PSA ever told you. So I hit the brakes gently, not hard enough to lock the wheels, and it did nothing. For a second I wondered if it was frozen, maybe caught in the beam and startled into statuehood. I honked once, short blast, more to make noise than to scare it. It didn't flinch. I flashed my lights with a quick flick, a pattern I use when someone's in the middle of the road. Usually that gets results. Something will move aside, a raccoon will scuttle. The deer didn't move. It just looked past my left shoulder into the trees like it was staring at something nobody else could see. I killed my high beams and let the low beams play across its flank. The deer still didn't move. I rolled down the window, partly because I wanted to listen for the little clack of running hooves, and partly because I needed air. The wind smelled like iron, sharp and metallic, and the radio clicked off by itself. For a beat, everything in the car felt amplified. The whir of the engine, the slight creak of the seat, the frog noise from a ditch somewhere, and then nothing else at all. The insects that usually filled the yards were gone, like someone had muted them. "Hey," I said, because it felt absurd not to say anything. The word sounded small in the dark. The deer tilted its head an inch and then went back to staring into the trees. I scraped the brake lights with my fingers. Little pressure, 2 beeps on my horn. Nothing. I thought about backing up, but the road is narrow there and the shoulder drops off. I didn't want to get stuck. The seatbelt buckle clicked once as I shifted in the driver's seat, and that sound snapped the night back a hair. Finally, a faint buzzing swept across the road overhead, like a giant insect, but low and even, under the clouds. It was gentle at first, like the distant whir of a transformer, then a little louder, and then it passed. My teeth felt like they were vibrating in my jaw for a second. The deer didn't flinch until the buzzing moved away completely. The second it passed, the deer turned on a dime and bolted into the woods. Fast, clean, all muscle and sudden motion. It was gone into the black in a single perfect leap. I exhaled so hard my chest hurt. The small panic that comes from something unexpected on a dark road left me jittery. I kept the truck in park and sat there for a long time, lights off because I didn't want to see the road in the same way again. The air smelled normal now, damp and faint. The radio, when I flicked it back, came up with normal music, no static. The cloud cover started to thin and a sliver of moonlight cut across the hood. I told myself aloud that it was probably a low-flying beehive of some sort, a kite with a motor, a hunter's lantern. All of those answers sounded flimsy when I said them. I got out because I had to see the rut of hooves or flattened grass, anything that would tell me the deer had been real and not something else. The gravel crunched under my feet. The place where the deer had stood looked the same as the rest of the road. Speckled gravel, dead leaves, a smear where a tire had passed earlier. No tracks, no blood, no slight depression in the dirt. I crouched and pressed my palm to the ground. It was cool. I could smell the leaves and a faint diesel scent. Nothing else. When I stood back up, the woods were making noise again. Frogs and faint a barred owl calling somewhere deeper in. The sudden silence of before felt like a closed door you could hear on the other side. I walked to the other side of the road and shined my flashlight into the tree line. The beam sliced through the black and landed on trunks and thatched leaves. I swept it methodically. Nothing moving, nothing reflective, nothing that suggested eyes glinting back. The deer hadn't stirred a trace. I got back in, started the truck, and drove on slowly. For the next 5 miles, my nerves were tight as violin strings. I had that jumpy awareness where every rustle is a footstep. Twice more the radio glitched, thin static, host's voice dragging out, and the GPS sputtered, rerouting me for no reason and then snapping back to the original line. Once I swore I saw a second, pale shape at the far edge of a field, like the side of a horse, but when I blinked, it was gone. There's a small diner on the main road where the night shift guys hang out. I pulled in because I needed coffee more than anything. The fluorescent interior felt like a reset button. The counter guy, a stocky fellow named Luis who knows me, asked if everything was all right. I told him about the deer, the silence, the buzz. He laughed a little, asked if I'd been on the job too long, then made me a coffee on the house. We stood by the counter while he refilled my cup and I watched the lot through the diner's big window. Nothing. No pale shapes, no shifting lights. Ordinary cars, frogs in the gutter, a stray cat with business elsewhere. On the ride home from the diner, the road felt ordinary. The highway signs were where they should be. The mile markers matched the distance on my meter. And the deer I had passed earlier was only a deer again, small and skittish in the beams of a different driver. I pulled into my driveway in a slow, deliberate way and sat in the truck a few seconds longer than I needed to, letting the normal city sounds creep back in. The distant thump of a stereo, the hum of a neighbor's air conditioner, the rattle of someone taking their trash out. I didn't tell anyone that night, not because I thought I was losing it, but because there wasn't a neat way to say what happened without sounding like I'd slept badly. The next morning, I drove the same stretch in daylight. There were hoof prints in the soft shoulder where deer go when they cross. Nothing remarkable. The patch of road where the deer had stopped was unmarked. Unremarkable. A woman with a kid on a bike waved as I passed. She looked like any other person in any other day. Some part of me keeps going over the buzzing. It was not an airplane, not a helicopter. It was low, like it skated just above the tree line, and it had that way of stopping the world for a second. I can explain the deer as deer behavior. Yes, they freeze, they stare. But the timing still sits odd, like a note struck out of place. I went back there a week later at dusk and saw nothing but the road and the trees. The frogs were loud again, as if nothing had ever muted them. I still drive that back road. I slow down where the lane narrows and keep my radio on. Sometimes on cold nights I think about rolling down the window when I go by that spot and listening for the hum. Mostly I don't. I drive with my hands in the same place on the wheel and the small honest tension of being careful, the same way you keep your eyes on the road when you've learned that the world can, in its own tiny ways, take you by surprise. I was driving home on Highway 14 around 1 in the morning when I saw them. I remember the time because my dashboard clock blinked 1:03 as I passed the county line sign, and I told myself I'd sleep when I got home. I was tired in that bone-deep way that comes after a 12-hour shift, hands sore, the back of my neck tight, but awake enough to keep my speed steady and my eyes focused. The road out there is the kind that goes on forever. Flat, straight, lined with corn and the occasional farmhouse a long way off. No streetlights, no turns, just an honest ribbon of asphalt and the stars above. Earlier that night, the ride had been ordinary enough. I'd tuned the radio to a late-night talk show and kept the volume low, windows cracked a bit for the cold. The first small, weird thing happened maybe 20 minutes out. The radio cut to static for a beat, then came back with the host mid-sentence, as if the station had erased a chunk of an interview and stitched it back together. I shrugged it off. Stations go clunky out in the boonies. Then my headlights caught a shape by the roadside. A mailbox, tilted strange, new plywood nailed over an old sign. I thought about stopping to check, the kind of practical caution that's part of being out late. But when I slowed, the shape was gone, and there was nothing to hit. Just a strip of grass blown flat like something had dragged by. I made a note to tell the neighbor in the morning and kept driving. A few miles later, I passed a farm I'd passed 100 times. The windmill that usually creaked by the corn was dead still. There was no hum, no chitter of night insects, nothing in the fields except a faint smell of ozone that set the back of my throat on edge. I don't usually notice smells on a drive, but that night it sat there like someone had rubbed the road with metal. All of that was small, little misfires that make you look up and tell yourself a sensible story. The big thing was the pair of headlights. They were far ahead, just pinpricks at first. Those two white arcs you get when there's someone coming on the other side of a long straight. At the distance they were, I figured I'd be passing them in 5 or 10 minutes. I checked my speed, nudged it down a hair because the thought of a tailgater at night makes me twitchy, and let the truck roll. The oddness was that the headlights didn't behave like oncoming lights. They were in the right place, on the opposite lane, but they weren't getting closer. They were moving, smoothly, the way a car moves on a highway, except they were moving backward. Not flickering, not swerving, not the erratic motion of someone in reverse. They were gliding down the lane away from me, remaining the same angular size in the distance. The beams still pointed at me, as if the car were driving away while somehow facing me. I blinked and thought maybe I'd misread it. Maybe the car had turned around a farm entrance and was heading the other way, or maybe I was dreaming from too many hours on my feet. But the headlights kept retreating down the asphalt, their beams staying bright and steady. They kept the same speed as any normal highway driver, smooth and even. For a full minute, I watched them glide backward, and I felt the kind of slow, creeping unease that starts not in the head, but in the middle of your chest. At the edge of my vision, the radio cut. Not a hiccup. It went to dead silence, and then static, then nothing. My phone vibrated against the console, but the screen was black when I reached for it. It lit only after I touched it, showing a missed text from my sister. "You okay?" I must have left the sound on that set of talk show reruns earlier. She texted after her shift, asking when I'd be home. I typed back soon and felt ridiculous for being out here, talking in the dark to a woman who'd probably be asleep by now. I kept my eyes on the retreating lights. I passed mile marker 42. The lights passed mile marker 46. The numbers were moving wrong in my head. I tried to do the math. If they were traveling at 60 and going away from me, how could I be catching them at all? Logic seemed thin in that strip of night. I thought about pulling over, about flipping the truck into park and calling the non-emergency line, but I didn't. Something about stepping out of the truck into that flat field space felt harder to do than it should have. As I drove, the lights kept their distance, a perfect mirror of normal highway motion, but inverted, retreating like a tape rewound at the same speed it had originally played. When I finally reached the place where I should have passed them, the hill with the old oak on the right, they'd slipped through that point and were already a shallow arc ahead of me, headlights still facing back, still the same brightness. The oak cast no shadow. The light didn't throw a beam into the trees. It was like the beams were painted onto the road with a steady hand. Once, just to break the spell, I hit my high beams for a second. My lights punched forward in the usual way, and the distant pair dimmed slightly, as if annoyed, like someone turning away. That made me laugh, nervously. I'm the kind of person who jokes when he's scared. I also realized then that there was no silhouette behind those lights. No shape of a hood, no reflection, nothing. Just 2 points of white in the dark that behaved like car lights, and yet they seemed free of a car's anatomy. At some point, a semi came toward me, low and slow. I remember the moment their orange reflector lights passed, and the driver glanced at me with that automatic nod you give another late-night driver. He didn't see what I was watching, the retreating headlights, or if he did, he didn't change a thing. After the rig passed, the pair of lights were still there, still moving backward like they had business elsewhere. I tried to hold my attention like a weight. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that headlights can be reflections, that sometimes you see an afterimage in the dark. I even mouthed out loud, "Okay," explanation, and listed them in my head. Mirage, hunter's lantern, trick of optics. But none of them matched the motion. Smooth, consistent, controlled backward motion at highway speed. Headlamps still aimed at me. Then, without fanfare, they blinked out. Not a flare, not a fade. 1 second, the road held 2 distant pins of white. The next second, they were gone, like someone had erased them with a single swipe. The beam that had felt so insistently present left nothing on the asphalt. No reflection in the puddles from the rain earlier, no glint off a metal sign, just black road under a black sky. My stomach dropped in the way it does when you're sure you've missed something crucial. I kept driving because the world doesn't wait for you to make sense of it. My hands were palm sweaty on the wheel. I passed mile marker 50 and the clock read 1:27, even though I'd been watching the far lights for a longer stretch. The truck's odometer ticked like always. The engine ran smooth. The radio came back, then cut again to a little bit of static and a jazz tune I didn't recognize. I wanted to believe that whatever I'd seen had a tidy explanation, something prosaic I could tell my sister over coffee. I saw some headlights acting weird, must have been a reflection. But my chest remembered pressure, like something had leaned on it and left a little bruise. I stopped at the first open store I hit, an all-night gas and deli, where the clerk squinted at me when I bought a soda and asked if I'd driven far. I said yes, and he said, "You look like you saw something." He didn't press it, and I didn't offer details. There wasn't anything to offer that sounded normal, and the clerk was already back to sweeping the counter. I sat in my truck with the heater on and the morphine of fluorescent lights seeping through the cab. The screen of my phone showed a half-dozen missed calls from a client I'd promised to call back. I tapped a reply and told him I'd be there tomorrow. Small things to stitch the world back together. The drive from the store to my apartment felt longer than the drive out. My attention kept snapping to the horizon, like a kid checking for fireworks that would never light. I tried to test myself, blink fast and see if the road had moved, look away and count to 5, anything to force normal continuity. The world was patient, ordinary. The cornfields breathed in the same rhythm, the distant farmhouse porch lights blinked the same way, my neighbor's dog barked at a cat as usual. I told myself the next day I'd drive out that way again at dusk when I could see every detail, maybe find a skid mark or a reflective tarp, some physical trace. In daylight, the road was mundane. Ruts from tractors, a stray mattress dumped in a ditch, the same tired mailbox with its flag hanging. Nothing to explain the retreating lights. Weeks passed. I told a few friends, half laughed it off, offered theories involving drones and military exercises and experimental drivers with a death wish. One friend who's a mechanic said, "Maybe a rig with reversible headlights," and I wanted to laugh because the idea felt too clever by half. Mostly I didn't talk about it. It felt personal, like something private had glanced off me in the night and gone on. Sometimes when I'm driving home now, I'll see a pair of lights way off and my stomach go tight. I slow down slightly, not because I'm afraid to pass them, but because I want to be the kind of person who notices small things and keeps his hands steady. I still sleep in my bed, go to work, laugh with people at the diner. The highway is a road, the lights are lights. But there is a small, stubborn memory that sits behind my ribs like a pebble. that two headlamps can move away from you like a person stepping back, that they can keep their gaze fixed as they go, and that when they decide to vanish, they can make the world look exactly the same as it always did, except for what you know you saw. We parked at the far end of the quarry lot because it was the only place the town lights didn't reach, and because Liam swore the Perseids were supposed to be good that night. It was the kind of clear August night where the air smelled like cut grass and the sky looked obscene. So many stars you could almost feel them if you leaned out the window. We'd both been up late, me grading papers, him on a double shift at the brewery, so the silence of the place felt like a relief. The quarry pond lay black and flat below us, and the half-moon glowed thin over the ridge. We sat with the truck idling, music off, windows down. Liam had a thermos of coffee. I had my phone on the dash with the camera app open like an idiot, ready to catch anything dramatic. At first, there were the usual things: a stray meteor every few minutes, a plane now and again. Then something small and bright caught my eye just above the tree line to the west. It looked like a star at first, a single point of white light, but very, very steady, not twinkling, not moving. I nudged the gear shift with my knee and said, "You see that?" Liam turned and squinted. I could see the light reflected in his pupils. "Yeah," he said. "Weird. Way too steady for a star." We watched it for maybe 30 seconds, and then it darted. Not a slow change in position like a plane or satellite, but a quick little hop to the right, then another, then a quick zig left. Not a blur. It stopped and held, perfect and bright, like someone had placed a thumbtack in the sky and moved it with a finger. It kept doing that, small jerky motions, like it was scanning or picking spots. Whatever it was moving impossibly fast for something at star distance. Liam laughed under his breath, partly because of the absurdity, and partly because we were both trying to make a joke to quiet the little nervousness I could feel under my ribs. He grabbed my phone, because his hands were steadier for filming, and aimed. The white point darted again, small and precise, and I felt this stupid, huge urge to record something that would prove we hadn't hallucinated it. His phone screen went black the moment he hit record. I thought he'd locked it or the battery had died, but the phone light in his hand was on. He tapped it. Nothing. "Weird," he said, and tried again. Same thing. I grabbed my phone and held it up, and the moment my camera app opened, my screen pixelated and went dark, like someone pulled a blackout curtain across the glass. Not just a glitch in the app, my whole screen looked dead white, then black. The phone still made the little shutter sound when I tapped, but I saw nothing. The phone still vibrated when texts came in. It was like the viewfinder itself had been muted. While we fiddled, the light kept darting, always keeping the same distance out over the ridge, sometimes stuttering down toward the tree line and then jerking back up. Every now and then, it would hang in a spot long enough that it looked almost like a new star had been born and then moved on. At one point, it darted to within the silhouette of the old radio tower a mile off and then zipped back out. The whole time, the quarry pond lay flat and black, reflecting nothing. We tried all sorts of things. Restarted phones, switched to video, to slow motion, to the camera's manual mode. Each time the screen would either go black or show only static. Liam's flashlight, when he clicked it on, looked normal, a white cone into the trees, but the camera would show nothing. We weren't alone in the lot. A couple of people walked their dogs farther up, and I yelled over to them to see if they spotted the flash. They stopped and looked and waved like, "Nice sky," then kept walking. No one else seemed to notice the jittery star the way we did, or if they did, they didn't react. At some point, the radio on the truck started to burble with static of its own. I hit the power and the static stopped. A car passed on the road below, and its taillights made a slow creeper of orange as it drove past. For a minute, my compass app spun a half degree like it had bumped. It calmed. None of the screens were showing the object, but our eyes were seeing it clearly. Bright, fast-moving, angular, even in its motion. Then it did something that made my throat dry. The light shot down in a perfect diagonal and paused right above the highest birch on the ridge, then did this shallow, precise back-and-forth motion like a pendulum. We were close enough, probably, that if we'd had binoculars, we could have made out a shape. I lifted my phone again, thumb trembling, but the screen stayed black. Liam swore and set the phone down on the dash as if it were fragile. I told him I was going to get closer. I know people who would tell you that's reckless. Maybe it was. I grabbed a flashlight and pocketed my phone, and we walked along the gravel edge toward the road that leads up the ridge. The light followed the crests of the trees as we moved. It didn't track us personally, but it never got further away. If anything, it matched our speed across the skyline. When we sprinted for a stretch, it matched that sprint, still darting in quick, unnatural hops. It was precise in a way that made me think of a machine, but there was no sound. No motors, no slosh of air. That lack of sound was the strangest thing. Up in the grasses, a fox yapped and a dog barked briefly, and the night noise filled in like an ordinary soundtrack. But right where that point of light hovered, the world felt thinner. Wind in the tops of the pines quieted, insects dropped away. It was as if the light's presence made the night itself stop fussing. We stopped at the start of the old service road and huffed in the dark. The phone's displays were blank whenever we pointed them at the sky. The screens worked, texts, maps, everything, but not when aimed at that point. I fumbled my phone, clicked the voice recorder because I wanted audio evidence at least. The recorder caught us breathing and Liam whispering, and then this second of nothing, like someone had lifted the sound away, and then the recorder picked us up again with our words muffled. I listened to it back later, and there's this tiny gap, a sharp quiet, where the sound drops to an almost inaudible hush. It didn't make sense. The light finally did something different. It darted once, and then instead of the quick hops it had been making, it pinned itself in the air and elongated, just for a heartbeat, into a slim, bright streak. For the one imperfect second, it looked like a form. Not a star, not a plane, but this metallic glint, a reflective edge angled at the sky. It was like seeing the glint off a hood ornament, but only in the sky. I swear on everything that when my phone had blacked out earlier, it saved something somewhere. Liam's camera app, once it woke up again, showed a thumbnail. One frame of footage, a single frozen moment with a silvery, angular flash mid-sky, and then black. We didn't see the thing after that. It snapped upwards so fast my stomach did that flip you get on a roller coaster, and then there was nothing but stars in their regular places, as if someone had wiped a screen and started the normal program again. Our phones lit up normally. The voice memo picked up again. There was just the scratch of us breathing and our shoes on gravel. The whole episode had the quality of someone rearranging a small private room of the world and then closing the door. We sat on the tailgate for a long time, replaying what happened, trying to find the angle that made it ordinary. Maybe a satellite cluster, a drone with mirrored surface, a trick of human eyes after a long week, caffeine and exhaustion playing with perception. The one-frame image on Liam's phone was the kind of proof that's maddening, too little, too crisp, and impossible to verify in isolation. We both took pictures of that single frame and texted them to friends. One of them joked to come back with night vision gear. Another wrote back a string of question marks. We drove home slow, both of us glued to the patches of sky between the treetops. The clock in my dashboard had jumped ahead 3 minutes at some point. Liam said his watch had stopped for a second and then come back on. I don't remember if we took the Ridgeline Road or the highway. That's a blur when I try to rewind it now. At 2:03 in the morning, I pulled into my driveway and sat there with the engine off for a long time, the single frozen frame on my screen like a fragment of a dream I could almost hold. The next day, we uploaded the one frame to my laptop to blow it up. It shows a bright metallic shard mid-sky with a little starlight halo around it, then a ragged black cut where the file ends. The file metadata is clean, timestamp, format, file size. Nothing corrupted except the missing minutes before and after. I ran it past a buddy who fiddles with cameras. He said maybe a sensor spike, lens flare, something technical. He could say the words that would make it smaller. He didn't say them with conviction. We haven't gone back to the quarry. Not because we think something dangerous is out there, more because that particular kind of strangeness sticks to a place. When I drive past the ridge now, I keep the radio on, a little louder than I used to. At night, I check that my phone's camera works if I point it anywhere mundane. The single frame sits in a folder somewhere on my hard drive. I pull it up sometimes and stare at the glint and try to remember what it felt like to have the world go quiet for a second, to see that impossible, reflecting sliver where the stars should be. I don't know what it was. I don't have a neat explanation, and I don't have a better image than that single frame. All I have is us, two people under a big sky, watching a bright thing that moved like it shouldn't have and then vanished, and a blank bit of footage that suggests the night kept more of itself than we were allowed to see. I was tired in that way you get after a long haul and 3 hours of waiting at a shipyard, the sort of tired that makes every radio crackle sound loud. My name's Tom Rains, and I drive a reefer out of St. Louis. That night I was heading south on I-55, 55, empty but with a promised load in Memphis in the morning. It had been raining off and on all evening. The highway was shiny and the wipers had a steady, dull rhythm. I had the CB on like always, Channel 19, a half-sleep habit more than anything, because the mic sitting by my knee feels oddly like company when the miles stretch. Little things started off normal and then not. Around 2 in the morning, my GPS blinked and told me to reroute for no reason. The blue line stuttered and came back to where I was. The radio cut to static half a second before a word from the talk show host, and then came back like someone had put a tin cup to the speaker and tapped. I muttered at it and flicked the knob, told myself it was old wiring in the cab. That's what I do. Find the mundane. You have to when you're on the road all the time. Further down, I passed the stretch of highway with the old overpass, where the reflectors have a way of catching your light and making it look like a string of eyes. That night, a few of the reflectors were missing. A farmer would probably notice, but the road was wide and empty, so I didn't think much of it. Twice I saw a flash of something off to the right. No shape, just a low silver glint over the tree line, and then it was gone. Once my dash clock flickered forward 2 minutes and then righted itself like nothing had changed. Little misalignments. Nothing you write home about. The CB started acting up more noticeably about 30 miles out. The background hiss would thicken and then clear, like a throat clearing, and once there was a faint voice that came through under the static, a syllable maybe, too far away to make out. I keyed the mic and called in a 10-4, as if the world outside the cab was just another trucker. The radio answered me with an empty hiss. My hand felt stupid, holding the mic like that. I put it down. There were cars, not many, and one semi that passed me with that big, slow whoosh that seems to come from somewhere deep in their diesel heart. The driver nodded, which is code for, "You okay?" And I nodded back, because you nod at people on the road even when you don't know what else to do. After he went past, I caught a flash of green ahead, an exit sign, the usual kind, far in the distance. I was half glad because it meant the highway would take a slight curve and there would be somewhere to ease off the throttle if I needed to. As I got closer, the sign looked wrong. From a mile out, it was the normal rectangular green, the kind that tells you mile numbers and exits. But it sat 20 feet above the shoulder, not on a pole where you expect it, but suspended over the road like someone hung it from nothing. I blinked slow and thought maybe the rain was playing tricks with the light. My windshield had a faint film on it, and long trips do weird things to a tired brain. The sign didn't wobble in the wind because there wasn't much wind. It didn't have any visible support. No pole, no tower, no cables visible from my angle. I kept the truck steady and watched it. The letters on the sign were clear: Exit 41, Memphis 56, everything that should have been sensible. There were reflectors across the face of it that made the wet night catch in little dots. For a moment, I thought of one of those highway maintenance rigs, a sign rig swinging out from a truck to warn traffic. But there was no truck, no crew, nothing in the shoulder. Just that green rectangle up among the wet mists, like a billboard somebody had levitated. I took the exit anyway because I wanted to get a closer look and because I drive by sight, not by superstition, and an exit is an exit even if it's floated off the ground. As I swung into the deceleration lane, the sign still hung there, exactly the same distance above the pavement. A sedan came up behind me and slowed, then passed on the left without a blink. No one else put on hazards or even slowed. That's the strange thing about odd moments on the road. Everyone else goes on like the world is tight and predictable. When I got under it, I had the weird small hope that there'd be a pole or a beam I'd missed from this angle. There was nothing, just the slick dark sky and the sign's face glowing green as if it were lit from within. The cab felt smaller in that space, like the sign put me in a box. For the half second I passed underneath, the CB went to static, thicker and deeper than the earlier hiss, and then it died. Not a little interference, but nothing. The display went black. The knobs still clicked when I spun them, but the radio made no sound, no hiss, no carrier, nothing. I slapped the mic and keyed it, and it was like someone had cut the line. I kept driving because you do. You breathe in and keep going when the wheels are moving under you. But the silence of the radio sat like a weight. I pulled off at the first truck stop I hit because rules and habits say, check your gear. A dog lay on the pavement near the diesel pumps and lifted its head and then put it back down. Inside, a few drivers drank coffee and traded stories that warmed the place. I opened the radio compartment, checked fuses, pulled the power lead loose and plugged it back in, the basic checks everyone does. The little green light on the unit came on when I flicked the switch. The squawk for power came, but the speakers stayed mute. Not even static. "Bout out?" asked an older fellow at the counter, a man with a cap that said 20 years on I-55. He'd been watching me fuss. I told him the short version and he shrugged. "Sometimes they go on the blink. Lightning will do it, or a short, or nobody." "You try Channel 9? He pointed. I flipped and the silence stayed. I hit 19 like habit and there was nothing but an empty green light under the knobby mic. I asked a mechanic to check the wiring while I grabbed a coffee. He came out, lifted the hood of the unit, peeked at the connectors and said everything looked fine. "You got power," he said, "but no carrier in. Might be a tower issue. Might be until morning." He scratched his chin and added, "You got phone?" I did. It worked. I called dispatch and the voice on the other end said they'd heard nothing of an outage, that towers usually put out notices. He told me to log it and not to sweat it too much. It felt like being told to ignore the hole in the wall. After an hour or so, the rain let up and the world around the truck felt sharper. The big aroma of diesel and warm coffee thick in the air. My hands stopped twitching on the wheel. The sign had been the oddest thing, but not the only one. Earlier, the GPS had blipped. Earlier, my dash clock had jumped. Earlier, the radio crackled like a throat. I told myself stories: induction from a transponder, a maintenance rig angled off camera, some weird strip of fiber optics over the road. All sensible. I signed the log and climbed back in. I drove on. The cab hummed like always. The CB stayed quiet for the rest of the night. I sat on channel 19 and keyed in a breaker every now and again, more to feel the click in my hand than to expect an answer. Sometimes an old habit is all you have to anchor on. When I rolled into Memphis at dawn, the sky was a clean sheet and the rest of the world looked as if nothing out of the ordinary had ever been suspended over a highway. I pulled up at the dock, checked my paperwork, and made a note in the log about the radio outage and the strange sign. The dispatcher put it in the system and told me they'd check with traffic control. They asked if I wanted to file a more formal report. I said yes, because I didn't want to keep the weirdness in my head alone. Later that afternoon, curious, I drove the same exit in daylight. Where the sign had been there was nothing but open air and a smear of damp on the asphalt where rain had run. No pole, no concrete footing, nothing at all. There were no tire marks, no footprints, no maintenance cones, just the shoulder and the ditch and the little ribbon of grass and the place where a green rectangle had floated the night before like a lantern. I drove home the next night with the CB on and it worked fine. People traded jokes on Channel 19 about traffic and pies and how the moon made the road look fat. I felt better because sound fills in the dark and makes it ordinary again. But the memory of that green face hung up in the back of my skull, a thing that didn't fit into the catalog of things that happen on the road. I couldn't explain it and didn't try to. What I could do was put it in the log, tell a few drivers at the diner, and keep going. I still use the CB because it's what we do, but every now and then when I'm eastbound and the night is slick and the signs glow bright, I glance up a little longer than I used to. The highway is a long place with angles you learn, and sometimes the world hands you a small, impossible thing and then lets you drive past it. I was staying at my cousin Aaron's place in Rockport, Massachusetts for a few days last September. He and his wife had just moved into this small two-story house a few blocks from the beach, kind of up on a hill where you could see the water if you leaned out the upstairs window. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. Grill some food, have a few beers, maybe take the kayaks out if the weather held up. The night it happened, the three of us had been down by the water earlier, just watching the tide come in. It was warm and windy, one of those late summer nights that feels like it's holding on to the last bit of heat before fall starts. By about 10:30, Aaron's wife had gone to bed, and he and I were still out on the back deck with a couple drinks, just talking about work and random stuff. The wind had picked up, and the ocean sounded louder than usual, kind of like static. At some point, Aaron said he was going to turn in too. I wasn't tired yet, so I stayed out there for a while. The deck looked straight out toward the Atlantic, maybe half a mile of dark, open water between the house and the horizon. There weren't any boats out that I could see, just a faint line of distant lights from some trawlers farther down the coast. It was around midnight when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were plane lights, 3 of them, evenly spaced, low on the horizon. But they weren't blinking like normal navigation lights do. They were steady, bright white, maybe a little bluish, and too low to be aircraft. They were moving together, slow and deliberate, almost like something being towed, except there wasn't any sound or outline around them. I watched them for a few minutes, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The lights glided west to east, parallel to the shoreline. Then they slowed, like they'd come to a stop, and after a few seconds, more appeared. 3 became 5, then 7, until there were maybe 9 or 10 of them, forming a perfect horizontal line. All the same size, all the same color, all evenly spaced. I remember thinking how precise it looked. Too precise. I went inside and grabbed my phone, thinking I'd try to record it, but when I came back out, the lights hadn't moved. They were just sitting there over the ocean, completely still. I started filming anyway, but when I looked through the screen, they barely showed up. Just faint dots, nothing like how bright they looked in person. After another minute or so, one of the lights blinked out, then another. Not like they dimmed. They just snapped off one by one, moving from left to right. No sound, no flash, no reflection on the water. When the last one disappeared, the horizon went completely black. I stood there waiting for them to come back, thinking maybe it was a trick of the eyes, hat or distant boat lights, or even drones. But the ocean stayed dark. There wasn't anything moving out there. I must have stayed on that deck another 20 minutes before I finally went inside. Aaron was asleep by then, so I just went to the guest room and lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about those lights. I tried to convince myself they were planes in a holding pattern or something, but I've lived near airports before. I know what that looks like. This was different. The next morning, I brought it up at breakfast. Aaron just laughed and said I'd probably seen fishing boats or helicopters. His wife mentioned maybe it was one of those offshore wind farms being worked on, but there aren't any visible from that part of the coast. I pulled up a map later just to check. Nothing. That night, I went back out to the deck around the same time. The ocean was calm, barely any wind. I stayed out there for an hour, maybe longer. Nothing unusual. Then, just as I was about to go in, I noticed something faint, a glow on the horizon. Not a light exactly, but more like the sky was getting slightly brighter in one narrow band above the water. I thought maybe a ship had turned on its deck lights, but as I watched, the brightness spread wider and then faded out again. It was subtle, but it didn't feel natural. Around 1 a.m., I finally went to bed. I didn't say anything to Aaron that time. I went back home to Vermont a few days later and didn't think much more about it. But about a week after that, I got a text from Aaron. Just a photo taken from his deck. It showed the same horizon I'd been watching, and a faint line of white lights. There were 5 this time, not as bright as what I'd seen, but definitely the same spacing, same formation. He wrote, "They're back." I called him right away, but he didn't answer. He texted about 15 minutes later saying they were gone again. I asked if he got video. He said he tried, but the camera wouldn't focus. After that, I didn't hear anything for a couple weeks. Then one night he called me. It was almost 2 in the morning. He sounded weird, kind of shaken. Said he'd been out walking his dog near the beach when he saw the lights again, only this time they weren't on the horizon. He said they were higher up, moving slowly inland, completely silent. He said they stopped directly above him, maybe a few hundred feet up, and he could see the glow reflecting faintly on the wet sand. Then, they just lifted straight up until they disappeared into the clouds. I asked him if there was any sound, and he said no, nothing. Even the wind had died down while it was happening. He said his dog started whining before he even saw the lights and wouldn't move until they were gone. I didn't know what to say. The next day, he sent me another text. Forget last night. Probably nothing. I haven't brought it up since. This past summer, I went back to visit him again. The nights were cooler, a little foggy. One evening after dinner, I found myself back on that same deck, just staring at the horizon. The ocean was calm and dark, no boats, no lights. I told myself it was just normal, that the ocean always looks strange at night, that light refracts weird over water. But standing there, I started to notice something else. The way the waves seemed to roll in out of sync, like there was a rhythm beneath them. A faint pulse in the reflection of the moonlight, as if something far out there was pushing against the surface. It could have been anything: current, tide, distant wakes. But I remember thinking how similar the pattern looked to that first line of lights. I stayed out there until I couldn't see the horizon anymore. Later that night, I woke up and noticed the blinds in the guest room glowing faintly. I thought maybe it was just the moon coming through, but when I looked outside, the sky over the ocean was completely lit up. Not like lightning, just a steady, pale light. No sound, no movement. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before fading out completely. The next morning, the news mentioned some unidentified aerial activity over Cape Ann. A few people reported strange lights to the Coast Guard, but nothing came of it. I asked Aaron if he saw it too. He said no. But that night, when we were sitting on the deck again, he kept glancing toward the horizon every few minutes, even when we were talking about something else. I don't think he realized he was doing it. Neither of us mentioned the lights. I drove out to Lake Hartwell that Friday evening, later than I'd planned. The sun was just dipping below the pines, and there was that cold bite in the air that comes with early November. I'd been cooped up all week at my desk job in Greenville, and I just wanted a quiet night by the water to clear my head. I parked near the public boat ramp. It was deserted, except for a couple of fishing boats tied up at the far end. The wind was calm, the surface of the lake glassy. I grabbed my jacket, my thermos, and a folding chair from the trunk and walked down the short path to the shore. The water lapped softly at the stones, nothing unusual. I set up my chair near the edge, rested my thermos in the sand, and sat down, just staring out across the lake. The air smelled like wet leaves and pine, and I could hear an occasional twig snap somewhere behind me in the woods. After a few minutes, I noticed something odd. Tiny ripples forming in the water, like someone had thrown small stones, but there wasn't a wind stirring, and I didn't see any fish jumping. I froze, looking around. Nothing. No birds, no animals, nothing moving. The ripples just kept appearing in irregular patterns, spreading out across the surface in no rhythm I could understand. I got up, curious, and walked closer to the water, squinting along the surface. That's when I saw it, a faint light, dim, greenish-white, gliding just above the water. It moved slowly, almost lazily, but it wasn't floating on the surface. It hovered maybe a foot above the lake. I swore I caught a shimmer in the air around it, like heat waves off a sidewalk in July. But the air was cold, crisp. My first thought was someone messing with a flashlight on a boat somewhere, but the lake was empty. I squatted near the edge, trying to see where it came from. The light seemed aware of me. It slowed when I leaned in, then drifted away as if keeping its distance. I fumbled for my phone to film it, but when I opened the camera, all I got was static. The screen flickered, the greenish-white glow just a blur, no shape, no detail. I muttered to myself, okay, that's weird, and tried to walk toward it. The light didn't speed up or panic, it just moved gently away from me. I kept my feet in the shallow water, careful not to splash. The ripples were still forming behind it, as though the lake itself was reacting to its presence. I stopped when I realized I couldn't hear anything beyond the faint slap of water against the shore. No frogs, no birds, no wind. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until every small sound feels amplified. I thought about calling someone, but the nearest house was half a mile away, and I didn't even know if I had a signal here. The light glided closer to a small cove, moving around a patch of reeds. I followed slowly, keeping the phone raised, and the static only intensified when I pointed the camera. The glow seemed more concentrated now, a soft, steady pulse that wasn't quite like a flashlight or lantern. My stomach started knotting, like the feeling when you drive over a bridge too high and the car shakes under you. I got within maybe 20 feet of the cove, and then it happened. The light blinked out, just vanished. The lake surface went smooth, the ripples disappeared, and the reeds swayed only in the faintest current. I stood there, half crouched, scanning the area. Nothing. No trail, no reflection, no sound. The water looked completely normal, like nothing had ever been there. I backed away slowly, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks in the twilight. But then I noticed the path I'd walked. My footprints in the sand were intact, but they seemed wrong, like they hadn't really pressed into the ground. I crouched and touched one with my hand. It was just sand, but somehow it didn't feel like it should be. I left the lake quickly after that, heart thumping. My thermos and chair were abandoned in the sand, forgotten in the rush to get back to the car. I didn't look back, and I didn't hear anything following me. No sound at all except my shoes on the gravel path. The moment I reached the car and started the engine, I felt a strange relief, almost like the lake and the air itself had released me. Driving home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road was empty, the trees shadowed but normal. I thought about calling someone to talk about it, but how do you explain a faint, hovering light that leaves ripples on a glassy lake and disappears when you get close? I didn't. I just drove, gripping the wheel a little too tightly. Later that night, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a lantern floating in the wind, but the lake was perfectly still. Maybe some phosphorescent algae, but I've fished here enough to know the water doesn't glow like that. Maybe a hallucination. I didn't feel tired or stressed that day, nothing to trigger anything like that. I checked my camera again, nothing recorded. My phone had plenty of storage, battery full, normal operation, just static where the light had been. It's been weeks now, and I still think about it. Every time I drive past Lake Hartwell, I slow down a little, stare at the water. Most nights it looks normal, but sometimes when the air is still and the lake mirrors the sky perfectly, I swear I see the faintest ripple out of nowhere moving across the water, and I feel that pull again, like the lake wants me to look closer. I don't go down to that cove anymore. I don't film it or try to follow it, but I keep thinking about those ripples. The light hovering just above the surface, the static on my phone. Whatever it wasn't natural. And even now, I don't know if I ever want to know. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand, and for a fraction of a second, thought it was my alarm. My hand groped at the dark, hit the soft case, silenced the buzz, and then everything settled back into the quiet of the house. The clock read 3:07 a.m. The dog, Nico, who sleeps at the foot of the bed when he's feeling brave, had his head on my ankle and didn't stir, which I took as a good sign. The good sign lasted until I pushed the covers back and padded to the bathroom. The hallway light was off. The house smelled faintly of cedar from the diffuser Aaron keeps on the counter, but stronger. There was a metallic edge in the air I couldn't place. What stopped me in the doorway was the bathroom mirror. Every mirror in the bathroom was fogged from the inside. I mean, the glass looked like somebody had breathed directly onto the inside of it. That soft, cloudy film you get after a hot shower, only there had been no shower. The rest of the room was cold, no steam on the bulbs, the tile under my feet wasn't warm, and the shower had been untouched. I reached out and touched the outside of the glass. It was cool and dry like the rest of the room. My fingertips left no smear. For a moment, I just stood there because the obvious explanations didn't add up in any order that made sense. The furnace had not kicked on, The humidifier wasn't running, and all the windows were closed. I rubbed my eyes and told myself I was half asleep, that I needed coffee and should go back to bed. Then a shape moved across the mirror. It was not a face, exactly, just a darker, slightly clearer silhouette slipping along the inside surface. It traced the top edge, moved in a lazy arc across the center, and stopped near the sink, as if considering the faucets. I watched it like a person watching someone else in a friend's house, curious and wary at once. When I blinked, it vanished. Not faded, not turned off, gone, like I had cleared the glass with my own eyelids. I checked the other mirror on the linen cupboard, fogged from the inside. I peered through the haze and saw the outline of the hallway reflected dimly. There were the stairs, the banister, the glow of the street lamp through the curtains in the living room. I turned away and came back. A tiny crescent of the fog had retreated, as if the mirror itself had shivered. Nico, who had followed me down the hall, pressed his shoulders against my knees and gave a single low whine. I went room to room after that, as if checking doors in a bad dream would make the situation more rational. The bedroom mirror, same thing. The full length on the closet door, fogged on the inside. Even the little medicine cabinet mirror in the downstairs powder room, which is rarely used, had the same inside fog film. Every glass surface that usually reflected me in the house carried that same odd interior haze. The windows were clear as glass, the kitchen sink was dry, and there was no steam anywhere. It made no scientific sense in the way that matters most. Things are only supposed to do this if there's hot water, humidity, or someone breathing on them. None of that was happening. I tried to record the bathroom with my phone. The camera showed the hazy mirror, but without the shape I had seen. The live view picked up a gray smear and then static, like a bad reception. I filmed for 30 seconds and played it back 3 times. The sound was normal, the little mechanical hum of the fridge and the creak of the house settling, but the file wouldn't show the silhouette. My phone battery also reads 72% despite being on the charger overnight. That made my chest tighten because I plug the phone in and rarely look at it otherwise. When I dug the charger out of the outlet, the bedside lamp flickered and went dark for half a second, then back to normal. A power hiccup. Coincidentally, everything that could be explained away, I told myself, should be. But the fog didn't make sense. Nico paced once and then lay down with his head on my slipper. He's an old dog, skeptical of excitement. His ears were on me, alert like a kid who's sure a story is coming. I made coffee even though it was early, just for the motion of it. While the kettle heated, I watched my reflection in the microwave door. The glass was clear, only the mirrors, not the tinted surfaces, not any reflective metal, only the mirrors. When Erin woke up around 6, I told her, starting with the practical stuff. All the mirrors are fogged, and then sliding into dumbfounded. She listened the way someone listens to an odd weather report, eyes concerned but not surprised in that casual, married sort of way. Erin suggested a burst of hot water. Maybe the neighbor was doing laundry? We both stood at the sink and turned every faucet in the house on for a minute, let the faucets rain, hoping warmth would clear it. When we checked, the fog remained stubbornly on the inner surfaces. The faucets didn't even seem to phase it. On one mirror, our handprints appeared on the outside only, 2 smeared ovals from where we touched the cool glass. On the inside, nothing but those same soft clouds. That was the point where the house told us it wasn't an isolated quirk. The thermostat started to read 62 when I swore I had it set to 68. The old wall clock in the hallway was off by exactly 3 minutes behind every other clock in the house. My email showed one unread message, but when I opened it, there was nothing in the inbox. Erin's phone lost GPS signal for a sliver in time, even though every tower in our area showed normal activity on the outage map. The weirdness threaded itself through the silly little mechanical things we use to feel the world is coherent. We called our neighbor Marta across the street. At first, she thought we were making some kind of joke, like, "You guys hitting some new trend?" She came over in her robe with a flashlight. She brought her phone because that's what people do now when something is wrong. Marta stayed maybe 10 minutes, checked a mirror, frowned, and then looked at us like she was trying to choose between calling someone official and not wanting to make a fuss. She left saying, "Keep an eye on it." which is the same as saying nothing at all. That afternoon, when I finally felt brave enough, I sat down and looked into one of the fogged mirrors for a long time. The haze had a faint motion to it now, like something breathing under glass. It moved around the edges as if searching. Once, in the corner of the bathroom mirror, the haze condensed into a darker shape that could have been the suggestion of shoulders. And then it was gone when I looked directly at it, not when I blinked this time, but when I dared to turn my head and look away for a second, like tracking an animal through trees and then it slips behind a trunk. By evening, I had to leave. I had a meeting, and the idea of sitting under fluorescent light and pretending nothing was off felt unbearable. Before I went, I made sure to close all the blinds and cover the big bedroom mirror with a sheet. It was a childish gesture, but covering it made the house feel less exposed, like putting on armor. Driving to the meeting, I kept thinking through possibilities. Condensation from a humidifier on the inside of the glass? Could a slow leak in a window cause it? Could some chemical be reacting on the mirrors? I even tried imaging the very unlikely and allowed my thoughts to dip into metaphors, reflections misbehaving like a trick mirror in a carnival. But they were metaphors, nothing more useful than that. I came back at midnight. The house smelled the same faint, metallic scent, as if something electronic had been dragged and tested. The front light was off. The street was quiet. I peeled the sheet off the bedroom mirror with a bit of theatrical courage and stood there with the dog padding at my feet. The glass was clear. Not completely. There was a faint line around the edge, like a memory of fog, but otherwise normal. The hallway clock read the right time. The thermostat showed 68. My phone read 100% battery. The house hummed like something that had put away an unexpected instrument and decided to let the world think everything had been normal all along. I wiped the bathroom mirror out of habit and found under the cloth a thin crescent smudged on the inside side surface. Not a finger, not a reflection. Just a faint arc that caught the light differently when I tilted my head. I took a picture of it with my phone. The photo came out gray and flat. When I zoomed in later, it was just pixels. I didn't sleep well. I left the bedroom mirror covered for a week after that, and every time I passed it, I felt the same little prickle. Curiosity mixed with the animal sense you get when someone has been in your house and you haven't noticed. We put a small camera out in the hall for a few nights, motion sensor cheap thing from Amazon, but the footage showed only empty rooms and the dog padding through in the middle of the night, sniffing at nothing and then moving on. No shape, no fog, no one breathing on the inside of the glass. I don't have an answer. The house went back to ordinary in many ways. Clocks accurate, phones charged, the thermostat obedient. And yet once in a while, when the weather turns and the house takes on that particular hush, I'll catch the faint metallic tang at the back of my throat and look at the mirrors differently. If I pass one at 3 in the morning, I'll run a hand over the outside of the glass just to make sure it's cool. Sometimes, when I'm brushing my teeth, I watch the inside of the mirror the way you watch the road at dusk, expecting something small and inexplicable to appear, and then, if I blink too long, disappear again. I drove up the service road to the old fire break because the horizon there is low and the light from town doesn't smear the sky. It was a January night, bitter enough that my cheeks went numb when I stepped out of the car, but the sky was the clean kind that only cold nights give you. Pin-sharp stars, a thin Milky Way, no moon to wash anything out. I brought a blanket, thermos of coffee, and a cheap foam pad to lie on. The plan was simple. Lay back, look up, and not think about anything that had to be done on Monday. For the first hour, I did exactly that. The usual small annoyances, my phone buzzing with pointless group messages, some passing headlights on the valley road far below, didn't matter. The cold cut the sound a little. The world felt physically smaller, contained by the horizon and the sky. Constellations I'd mostly forgotten returned to the edges of my vision the way familiar rooms do. I felt slow and steady, like an animal that's found a patch of sun. Around 11, a streak flicked across the sky slightly to my left. I sat up reflexively, wiped my hands on my jeans, and watched. It was quick, thin and white, like a meteor, but with an odd, steady brightness, not the ragged flare meteors usually have. It moved from near the western ridge to the center of the valley and vanished in a clean line as if a single frame had been cut out of the night. I said out loud, "Huh." I'd seen meteors before, but they never looked like someone had drawn a pencil line with light. I reached for my phone to record the slope where it had gone and noticed the horizon looked wrong in a way I couldn't name, like a photograph slightly out of focus at the edges. The radio in the background of some far-off farmhouse cut out for a second. My thermos hissed a small high note as it cooled on the ground. I set the phone down and lay back again. The air felt thinner now, as if someone had opened a window in an otherwise sealed room. I looked to the spot where the streak had finished and waited, half expecting nothing to happen. I told myself I was being silly, that meteors are common, that I should get more sleep and stop reading conspiracy forums at 2 in the morning. The night was so quiet that my thoughts sounded loud, a kind of nervous commentary. Then the streak came back. It appeared in the very exact spot where the first one had vanished and moved in the opposite direction, east to west, tracing the original line back almost perfectly, as if someone had hit rewind on a film. The backwards pass was slower than the first, and for a moment it looked like two separate lights in perfect registration. The first one's path still burned faintly in my sight, and then the second one rewound over it. There was no double exposure, no trail of smoke, just a clean, precise retrace. My initial disbelief turned into something sharper. I sat up so fast my blanket slid, and I had to adjust my headlamp. My hands were shaking. I pointed the phone again, thumb fumbling to hit record, but the live image was weird, grainy, and where the streak should have been, the screen showed a fuzzy smear of gray that didn't resolve into the crisp line I could see with my eyes. I filmed anyway. The video saved as nothing more than a wash of light and static when I checked it later. For the next minute, the reversed streak and the original ghost I thought I'd seen seemed to hang over one another. The second pass mirrored the first with uncanny precision. Speed, angle, the point of beginning and ending, all mirrored. It felt like watching someone trace your handwriting with a steady, practiced hand. I couldn't tell whether I should feel amazed or stupid for being frightened. A small, practical fear crept in after that. What do you do when something in the sky does not conform to your ideas of objects? I tried calling Mark, who's into sky watching and would probably have said something useful. Satellite? Re-entry fragment? But my phone had one bar and the call didn't go through. I texted him a photo that didn't show anything but a smudge. No reply. A distant hound barked once, sharp, and then the night swallowed it like a hand closing. The wind, there had been a breeze a little while earlier, died as if someone had gathered it into their fists. The silence that followed was full in a way that made my ears feel crowded. I realized then that I couldn't hear the road below at all. Normally at this height, you get a faint ribbon of tires and the rumble from the far quarry. Tonight, the valley made no sound. The thought that came next was stupid but immediate. Maybe there were others here. I scanned the ridge with the beam from my headlamp, sweeping the scrub, the low laurel, the fence posts. Dark. No tent lights, no reflective gear, nothing. The only lights were the stars and that lingering faint smear in my head where the streak had gone. A minute later, the light appeared again. Same place, same path forward as the first time. And again, moments after it vanished, there was a backward pass across the exact same line. This rhythm continued. Forward, pause, reverse, 3 times within 10 minutes. Each forward pass felt slightly sharper than the last. Each rewind as smooth as a practiced hand erasing pencil. The effect wasn't fast enough to blur into motion. You could see it move, watch it trace. I started timing them in my head, trying to give structure to what I was seeing. The forward pass lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds. The return took 4 or 5. It was like someone walking a line, then returning more slowly to check their work. I tried to rationalize. Satellite re-entry moves in one direction. A plane glows in its own pattern and has navigation lights. Drones hover and make a sound. There was no sound. Meteors don't reverse. The only analog I could come up with was a movie projector running backward, and even that satisfied nothing. The reverse traces matched each forward stroke down to an imperceptible wobble. I stood up and took a few steps toward the fence, the cold biting through my jeans. The closer I got to the edge, the more the air felt like a thin sheet vibrating against my face. Goosebumps rose, and not from cold. I had the urge to call someone who would say normal things and calm me, but everyone I could think to call had odd hours or a job or a life. Besides, what would I even say? Come outside. I don't understand how parabolas work in the sky tonight. On the third cycle, something else happened. As the light traced backward, the stars directly behind it dimmed a notch, as if the streak carried a shadow that came from above, not the ground. It was subtle enough that I almost missed it, but now, when I looked at that area of sky, the familiar thumbprint of the Milky Way seemed fractionally different. I checked my watch. The digital clock said 11:32. When the streak finished its backward motion, the watch flicked briefly and read 11:31. The numbers clicked by on their own a fraction of a second later and corrected. I stared at that tiny discrepancy until my eyes watered. My rational self kept saying, camera glitch, wristwatch battery, optical illusion. The rest of me, smaller, older, animal, knew something had altered sequence, rhythm, the way the world was telling time for a breath. The texture of normalcy had a seam in it now. At one point, I slumped back on the pad and laughed because laughter felt safer than panic. It came out too sharp. I thought of calling someone to drive up and look, but a selfish voice in my head kept me still. This felt private, like a tiny, impossible thing not yet spoiled by witnesses. I wanted to be the person who had seen it, unshared, and therefore somehow truer. But I filmed again, hands steadier, trying to catch the motion. When I played it back, the pixels in the phone stuttered during the backward pass, like the camera buffer hiccuped. The timestamp on the clip didn't match the clock on my dash by a few seconds. The file stuttered and saved as two separate clips where there should have been one continuous moment. I scrolled through, frame by frame. The streak was a smear in some frames, absent in others. The audio was a thin hiss. By midnight, the pattern had stopped. The sky returned to its plain high parlance of stars. My thermos was empty, and my knees hurt from sitting wrong. I packed slowly, stuffing the blanket into the trunk with hands that still felt marginally foreign. The light below me on the valley road came back like normal sound after a bell. The far quarry thinned into a low sigh, and a dog somewhere started barking for real. On the drive down the service road, the air felt ordinary again. I took the bends slow because I didn't trust my head. Every straight run felt like the beginning of something. My phone finally buzzed with a reply from Mark. Probably satellites. People see weird stuff, especially tonight. His voice settled me in an adult sort of way. I wanted that certainty to be true. At home, I didn't sleep well. In the dark, the backward traces replayed in the periphery of my thoughts like a film loop you can't fast forward. In the morning, I checked the videos again. The longest clip showed a whitewash that corresponded to what I'd seen. The forward and backward passes, but the biggest detail was the gap where the frames jumped. The timestamps on my phone and the dash clock were off by 12 seconds across 3 clips. My watch ticked like a sensible animal. I've been back up to that fire break twice since. The nights were clear both times, but the sky was polite and conventional. Satellites, a meteor here, a plane there. The exact place the streak had come from felt the same as always. Scrub, rock, fence posts, the same low sweep of horizon. Nothing changed on the ground to say the sky had been anything but a vault. People I told shrugged, camera artifact, atmospheric lensing, coincidence. Those responses are reasonable. They are also quiet in the way of someone stepping away from something fragile. If I had to write the event down for a report, I'd put down the facts. Time, location, the flashes forward and back, the timestamps shifting, and call it anomalous, the kind of thing you mark and set in a file. That would be a tidy end. I keep the memory separate from the everyday stuff. When I lie in bed and look at the ceiling, occasionally I'll picture the streak reversing, ink running backward across paper. It's a clear, precise image. I don't make grand claims. I don't say it was alien or divine. I say I saw a motion in the sky that behaved like a hand tracing and then erasing. And because it matched itself so exactly, it left me with a small, strange impression that, for a few minutes, the night was being checked for errors and then set back in order. It was a red-eye from Seattle to Chicago, middle of February. One of those flights where everyone's half asleep before the plane even leaves the ground. I'd been in Seattle for work and had an early meeting the next morning, so I took the cheapest flight I could find, aisle seat 25B. The flight left around 11:40 p.m. The cabin lights dimmed right after takeoff, and most people went quiet. I couldn't sleep though. I never can on planes. I just scrolled through my phone, read a few emails, that kind of thing. About 40 minutes in, I leaned over to stretch and glanced toward the window. The guy in 25A, younger guy, headphones in, hoodie up, was asleep. His window shade was halfway open. I could see the faint glow of the wing lights and the usual black void beyond. But as we started banking east, something caught my eye. It looked like another plane flying below us, a little to the right, maybe a few thousand feet down. It wasn't flashing like normal aircraft lights. It just had this dull white glow, almost like it was lit from the inside. At first, I figured it was a reflection from our own lights, but as I watched, it stayed exactly in sync with us. Every small turn, every angle of descent or correction, it mirrored us perfectly. I waited for it to drift away or change position, but it didn't. It just kept following. I leaned closer to the window, squinting past the reflection of the cabin lights. I could make out its shape better then, oval, or maybe like a teardrop seen from above. No wings, no tail, just a smooth, faintly glowing form keeping pace with us, steady as a shadow. I sat back and tried to play it off. Could have been another flight on a parallel route, maybe at a different altitude. That happens all the time. But when the captain came on a few minutes later to say we'd be adjusting course slightly for weather, I felt the plane turn, and the light below turned with it, perfectly. Not delayed, not off by even a second. I stared at it for a long time. My eyes kept adjusting between the darkness and the glow. I remember thinking how oddly bright it looked for being that far below. It wasn't blinding or anything, just clear, defined. I finally nudged the guy next to me. "Hey, sorry. You mind if I look out the window for a sec?" He mumbled something, lifted the shade all the way up, and leaned back to sleep again. I pressed my face closer to the glass. It was still there. We were probably over Montana by then, miles of nothing but dark. No towns, no lights below us. Just this thing gliding under us like a reflection that shouldn't exist. The weirdest part was how constant it was. We hit some turbulence, little jolts, and it kept moving smooth and steady like the bumps didn't affect it. I thought about getting a flight attendant, but the rational part of my brain kept saying, "You're tired, it's late, it's just some weird light phenomenon." Then the seatbelt sign came on, and the captain's voice came through again. "Folks, we're getting reports of some unexpected crosswinds at this altitude, so we're going to climb a bit." The engines deepened, the plane tilted upward, and that glowing thing followed. Same rate of climb. Same distance below. I felt something in my stomach twist. I watched it what felt like 20 minutes, but could have been less. The longer I looked, the less sure I was of the scale. At times it seemed far below us, other times closer, like it was rising or shrinking. The glow had this pulsing quality, slow, almost like breathing, but not rhythmic enough to be mechanical. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself I'd imagined it, everything outside went pitch black. Not cloudy dark, just gone. The glow, the faint horizon, all of it disappeared for maybe 2 seconds. When the view came back, the glowing shape was gone. I blinked a few times and leaned closer to the window. Nothing. Just stars and the red light blinking on our wingtip. I sat back, trying to decide if I just zoned out. Maybe I'd been staring too long and my eyes had played tricks on me. Then, maybe 5 minutes later, I caught a flicker. Far off to the left this time. The same dull, white glow, smaller but moving fast. It zipped parallel to us for a few seconds, then slowed and matched speed again. That was when I noticed something else. The cabin felt quiet. Not just the usual hum of the engines, but like everything had dampened. My ears popped slightly. No one else around me seemed to notice. A couple people were sleeping, a few had headphones in. The glow drifted closer, angling beneath our wing. I leaned as far as I could to keep it in view. It hovered there, steady, until I realized it wasn't lighting up the wing at all. The glow didn't reflect on anything. It was like light that didn't interact with the plane or the air or anything around it. The engines made a deep, low whine, and I felt a slight shudder. Not turbulence exactly, more like the pressure shifted. I looked back out and saw that the glow had risen higher, almost level with us now. And that's when the guy in the window seat finally stirred. He rubbed his eyes, leaned toward the window, and froze. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. I said, "You see it too?" He nodded slowly. "It's been following us?" "Yeah, for a while." We both watched in silence as it drifted closer, until it was about parallel with the wing. Still no detail to it, just this smooth white oval, faintly pulsating. Then, without warning, the entire cabin lights flickered. Just once. Half a second. When they came back on, the glow was gone. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, but didn't. After a few seconds, he pulled his shade down and just sat there, staring at the seat in front of him. I stayed awake the rest of the flight, watching through the tiny gap where the shade didn't fully close. I didn't see it again until we started descending toward Chicago. We were lower now, clouds beneath us, lights of small towns starting to appear. As the plane banked to line up with the runway, I saw the glow again, this time above us, faint and distant, moving in the opposite direction. No one else reacted. It was gone before I could even tap the window guy again. When we landed, I felt drained. Everyone else just grabbed their bags and shuffled off, yawning, stretching. I didn't say anything to anyone. I tried to check flight radar later that morning, see if any planes had been on a similar route, maybe a refueling jet or military craft. Nothing. The airspace below our path was empty at that time. I didn't think about it again for a while. Then about 3 weeks later, I was on another night flight, this time from Denver to Atlanta, and I caught myself glancing out the window more than usual. It was clear that night, no clouds, lots of stars. Halfway through the flight, I saw it again. Same dull white glow, same slow pace, this time much farther away. I didn't point it out to anyone. It didn't follow us for long, maybe 5 minutes. Then it faded out, like someone dimmed a light until it disappeared. When we landed, I checked the window reflection on the inside of the plane to make sure there wasn't something that could have explained it. A reflection from a phone, a reading light, anything. But there wasn't. I even tried to recreate it a week later on a short evening flight back home. I booked the window seat this time, watched the reflection patterns, looked for other planes. Nothing ever matched what I saw. The glow hasn't shown up again since then, but I still catch myself looking for it, especially during turns. Those moments when the plane tilts just enough to give you a view of the dark below. There's this instant where everything outside the window is black, just the faint curve of the wing, and I almost expect to see that dull, pale shape keeping pace underneath us, following every move like a mirror. My phone buzzed on the nightstand and woke me before the sound finished. I rolled over, squinted at the screen, and saw my own number staring back at me like a dare. It said video call in small letters, and there was no name attached, just the digits I'd been assigned for 8 years now. For a second, I thought I'd set it to forward or accidentally hit something in my pocket. I thumbed the green button out of habit. The screen filled with grain at first, then a dark image that didn't resolve into anything familiar. The audio came in as a low, steady rumble, like wind moving through a metal grate or distant traffic under a bridge. It had texture, a mechanical quality that made the hairs on my forearms prick up. No one spoke. I tapped the screen to flip the camera so whoever was calling could see me. Nothing changed. The rumble kept rolling like a wave under everything. The room looked wrong through my phone, darker and with a sort of slow smear where light should be. For a moment, I thought the feed was from outside the house. It drifted, subtly as if the camera were moving, and when the image steadied again, I recognized the edge of my own bedside lamp, the slant of the headboard. The feed was looking at my bed. I felt stupidly exposed, like I'd left the curtains open, until I realized the angle wasn't mine. The camera was coming from somewhere above, not from the doorway. It was a ceiling shot of my own bedroom, but the mattress looked slept in a way I didn't feel. I sat up, and the rumble shifted a fraction of a decibel as if it had noticed movement. I kept the phone to my ear because that felt safer than looking at the screen. I tried to call back, hit end, redialed my own number. Rings. Rings. The call went to voicemail with a mechanical thunk that cut the rumble clean. My voicemail had no new messages. When I slid out of bed, the room smelled faintly of metal and rain. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:11 a.m. in blinking amber, which somehow made the whole thing more real. I fumbled for the light, turned it on, and the lamp came up as it always did, warm, ordinary, the glow not touching the ceiling, like the video had. My phone battery read 72%. I glanced at the feed again. The image froze on a dark blur and stayed dark even after I pulled down the notification shade. The record showed the call came from within the house. It listed my number as the caller, and then under call details it said, outgoing 2:14 a.m. My chest went hollow. That time should have been an hour plus ago. Outside, the street had that quiet that feels like a borrowed thing. No late trucks, no porch lights left on. For the past few days, our neighborhood had felt off in little ways. The clock above the pizzeria's door had skipped 5 minutes twice over the weekend. Mrs. Klein across the street had asked if anyone else's microwave had turned itself on at odd hours. Last night, the power had blinked for exactly 7 seconds and then steadied. I joked about storms coming in, but the jokes didn't land. Now it felt like a pile of tiny loose things that, assembled, made a wrong shape. I got dressed quick and padded out into the hall. My cat, Scout, perked up and came to the threshold. Her fur bristled the way she did before thunderstorms. She cut across my legs and stared at the back door like she expected to see someone there. I told myself I was being ridiculous and opened the door anyway. The air outside smelled of wet pavement and wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. In the distance, the low rumble I'd heard on the video pulsed once and stopped. I couldn't work out whether it came from far away or right under my feet. Down the block, the Joneses had left a porch light on. Their house was dark beyond that, but a thin glow framed the curtains like a late-night TV. We waved when we passed each other earlier in the week, and I'd thought nothing of how tired Mr. Jones looked. Now, I noticed his silhouette in profile at the window, and for a second his head moved in a way that wasn't quite his control. He seemed to be listening to something I couldn't hear. I walked to the corner where the bus stop sat and sat down on the metal bench because moving didn't make things clearer. The rumble returned, this time as a distant freight. Heavy, even. A car went by and its tires hissed through the puddles, normal and ordinary. My phone buzzed again. Same number, same video call. I didn't pick up. The phone kept ringing at odd intervals. 2 minutes, 6, nearly 10. Always for myself, always sending that same low-slung sound into the world. I started filming the front of my house with the spare battery-powered camera I keep in the hall for storms, thinking some other person's phone had been spoofing mine. The footage showed nothing at first. Then a thin smear of light crossing the yard like heat over asphalt, and at the exact second the smear crossed the frame, the call log cycled a new outgoing time, 2:34 a.m. The timestamps jittered on the camera and on my phone like they were trying to agree and failing. I went back inside because I wanted to be rational and warm and physically present where my things were. Inside, the kettle on the stove was slightly warm to the touch, though I was sure I hadn't used it since dinner. The bedside lamp's cord was still looped where it always sat. Nothing was disturbed. Scout hopped up onto the bed and curled into a tight ball like she did when she wanted to be left alone, and I sat on the edge and tried to steady my breathing. The house felt inhabited by some patient thing that watched, measured, then did nothing. At 2:49, the doorbell rang. I froze. My hands were cold enough to make the metal phone case ache. I looked at the peephole and saw nothing but the dark of the porch. Through the glass, the world looked flat, drained of detail. I opened the door an inch and called, "Who is it?" My voice sounded smaller than it should have. No answer. A breeze pushed past me and I smelled salt and a faint disinfectant, two smells that do not sit together. The police came after a neighbor called when the doorbell rang again, and then the phone started ringing from within the house. 2 patrol cars idled in the street with the emergency lights off out of an excess of caution. An officer asked me for my ID, asked if I'd authorized any device to call my number, and I told her the truth. It had called me twice already, that the camera on the porch had caught something like a heat smear, and that I'd answered the first one and heard a metal wind and watched my own bedroom on the screen. She wrote it down and didn't look surprised, because she had the professional training to hide disbelief. She took the laptop with the camera footage and said they'd log it. They sat in the squad car for a long time and chewed the inside of their cheeks with the sort of attention that belongs to people who wait through unlikely calls. The older one, Officer Ramirez, said, "Sometimes people spoof numbers, like that was a thing that could be typed into being and made sense of." The younger one kept glancing at his phone and back at the house and kept swallowing. I wanted to ask them if they'd ever had their own number call them from inside a house. I couldn't figure out how to ask without sounding like I had finally lost the shape of things. The phone rang again, loud and close. This time, I didn't let it go to voicemail. I hit the green button with my thumb and held the phone steady. The image filled the screen, my bedroom from above, slightly out of focus, and the rumble rolled under it like waves. But there, in the corner of the frame, something shifted. A darker patch of shadow that seemed to tilt the same way my head does when I'm thinking. The timestamp in the corner of the feed read 2:14 a.m. Again, not now, not the present. When I looked at the clock on my wall, it read 3:17. "Hello?" I said to the black glass because it felt better than listening to the hum. The rattle in the feed got louder for a second, and then the screen filled with static and the call dropped. The phone reset to the home screen with my number still listed at the top. I backed away from it like it might bite. The officers left without making a report beyond the usual line items. "We'll file it," Officer Ramirez said. "We'll check the logs." That meant the city would have a thing in a folder about a house with a phantom dial tone and a neighbor who watched her bedroom from a camera that shouldn't have been able to call itself. It felt like being given a piece of paper that would not help. I sat down at the table with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, too weak to move me. The morning light, thin, gray, started to come through the blinds. I scrolled through my camera roll and found a single new photo I didn't remember taking. Me, asleep on my side, hair stuck to my forehead, study lamp on, blanket half kicked off. The east-facing window showed the faintest blur of something outside, like fog made of glass. The file's metadata said it had been captured at 2:13 a.m. I tried to make sense of my own timeline, but couldn't. My phone said the photo was created at the same instant my own number had been calling me from inside the house. I drove to work because leaving town felt like admitting the problem belonged to me. On the way, I called Mom and told her about the calls. She said, "Maybe someone's pranking you, Han, or your phone's acting up." She always used the up tone when she wanted to smooth worry into normal. I saw the pizzeria's clock again as I passed. This time it read correctly. The day progressed with the small, ordinary tasks of being a person. Emails, a meeting with a client who wanted a logo redrawn, a barista who wrote my name on the cup wrong. The world calibrated itself into little predictable clicks. All of it felt like a set of parts that would, if left alone, keep the machine of life turning. That night, I locked the doors twice and left some lights on. Scout jumped up on the bed and wound herself into my side. At 11:08 p.m., my phone buzzed once and went to voicemail. No call, no log, no new files. The rumble did not return. I'm writing this down because the house still seems normal, and that alone is a kind of answer I can live with. The photo of me on the bed sits in my phone beneath the others like evidence in a puzzle. And when I scroll past it, I have to remind myself I really was there that night, in that bed, with the lamp on and the world buzzing with tiny, ordinary noises. But sometimes at 2:14 in the morning, if I wake and look at the ceiling, I swear I can hear something like wind through metal. It pulls at that logic, the most reasonable, boring part of me, and I hold the covers up to my chin like that will be enough.